Recording in progress.
We'd like to call to order the February 2nd meeting of the Clive City Council. Would the clerk please call roll?
Mayor Edwards,
Here.
Council members Klein,
Here.
McCoy,
Here.
Judkins,
Here.
Weaver, here, Michelinani.
Here. Very good. Would you all please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have approval of the agenda. I know of no changes.
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda. Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Our agenda is approved. Next is our citizens' presentation. This is the time period wherein someone can approach the council on an item that is not on the agenda. And while Pete checks to see if anyone is online, let me just remind everyone of our operating principles. Clive supports the pillars of character counts, endeavoring at all times to promote and model the principles of trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. In conducting our work, we expect all participants to act in a respectful manner consistent with these principles. With that in mind, Pete, do we have anyone online?
No, Your Honor.
Do we have anyone in the chamber who'd like to address us on a matter that is not on the agenda? If you would come forward, tell us who you are, and give us your address for the record. Normally, in a citizen's presentation, we prefer if you're able to wrap things up in about 3 or 4 minutes. And if you have additional materials, we welcome them in electronic, print, or other means. So please tell us who you are and where you live.
My name is Sharon Donovan, and I live in Boston Parkway. I am here, most people that appear before you are asking for something, and I am no different. I am asking for something. I'm asking that you put an article in your April newsletter that goes out, asking people in Clive not to mow their yards in May. This is a movement that is gaining popularity throughout the world in many countries. It's called No Mow, like mow your yard, May. No Mow May. And it's being, it's occurring for a very important reason. And that's because our pollinators are dying. 45% of professional beekeepers last year lost 45% of their bee colonies. And the bees are, as you know, extremely important. And they are dying because of pesticide use, and primarily pesticide use, and loss of habitat. And if you drive down a city street of Clive, which I do regularly, and I see perfect lawn, perfect lawn, perfect lawn, perfect lawn. And it's okay if one person uses pesticides on their lawn, but it's not one person, it's thousands. And it's professionals coming with very toxic pesticides that are also running into our drinking water too, by the way, but it's killing everything in that lawn. And we need to give the pollinators an opportunity to get a foothold in May, just for the month of May. And that means that what's going to grow in that grass, violets, dandelions, clover, and this gives the pollinators an opportunity to get a little bit of growth as they're hatching out into the environment. So there's a very well-known U.S. forester ecologist by the name of Suzanne Lerman, and she also says it also helps the butterflies, the beetles, spiders, which is then in turn food for the bees. And we're losing our bees and we're losing our birds, both. So even though this is kind of a small subject, it's important. It's really, really important. And it's something that's so easy. And it's something we can do. And people, I think, would cooperate with it. So what I'm asking is that you put an article in the April newsletter asking the citizens of Clive not to mow their grass the month of May. That's what, and if anybody would like to look and have more information about this, I don't want to take up any more time, any information, I'd be happy to come and meet with you. By the way, the city of Cedar Falls has passed a ordinance, not an ordinance, a proclamation about not mowing your lawn the month of May. And Mayor, Des Moines Mayor Cowley is in supporting it also. So the movement is growing, support is growing. I think the citizens of Clive would support it. And if you could put an article in the April newsletter, then asking the citizens not to mow their lawn in May, it would help nature, would help the bees. And this is really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here to approach the council on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to consent.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion is second to approve consent items. Further discussion? Seeing none, would the council please vote? And will the clerk please post that vote?
Just tell me, I'll click it in.
So our consent items are approved by a vote of 5-0. Next item, we have an introduction of Cutter Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce the newest member of the Leisure Services team. We are recommending that Cutter Nelson be the new operations specialist in the Parks Division. Cutter comes to us from a lot of different places, but his most recent 2 stops were at the city of Des Moines and in Warren County. So we're excited to have him. He starts on Monday, and he'll really form the new backbone of that new natural resource, water resources team that we've been talking about for a long time. And the position was authorized in this current budget. So with that, I'll introduce Cutter.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Cutter Nelson. I was born and raised just down the road here in Urbandale. I'm excited to get started with Clive and see what the city has to offer.
Well, we're excited to have you join the team.
Thank you.
Anything from the council?
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Very good. Next, we'll move into our action items. The first one is a public hearing on the 23 Budget Amendment Number 1. Did we publish the appropriate public notice?
Yes, Your Honor, it was published in the Des Moines Register on January 23rd, 2023.
Very good. Liz, I believe you have this.
I do. Good evening, Mayor and Council. What we have before you, of course, is the budget budget amendment number 1 of the year. The current budget, of course, was approved 18 months ago, so you can imagine that we're going to have some changes. In the memo that was provided in the packet was an outline of all of the new revenues and the expected expenditures for this year. And I would just open up to any questions that you might have about those.
Questions for Liz? If there aren't questions or,
Move the resolution.
nope. The next action we need to take is to close the public hearing.
My bad.
Want to try it
Move
again?
to close the public hearing.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing.
Okay.
Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote to close the public hearing?
I think I know that by now.
Hard to have rookies on.
And will the clerk please post that vote? So the vote to close the public hearing passes by a vote of 5-0. Is there some action the council would like to take?
Move the resolution.
We have a motion and a second on the resolution. Further discussion?
Trying to move us along, John.
I appreciate that. Seeing none, would the council please vote?
Must be an Indiana game.
And would the clerk please post that vote? The resolution approving amendment number 1 passes by a vote of 5-0. Next, we'll move on to the next public hearing, and do we publish the appropriate public notice?
Yes, Your Honor, that one was published in the Des Moines Register on January 16th, 2023.
Thank you. And
Coming, Jeff?
Jeff?
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Sorry about that, getting things in order here. Here to approve the 2080 agreement with the city of Waukee. The agreement basically outlines all the requirements for us to grant easements and convey to them those easements in the form that was necessary. In addition, we're also going to be discussing how we use the money that they pay us, which is a little over $1.1 million. Some of that comes in sponsored project money from the SRF loan. And we will get it through them. Regardless of how much that we get, the total of 1.1 million and a little bit more will be paid to us. With that, I guess now let's discuss, while we're discussing this, we can go on through. After we grant the easements, or approve the agreement, 2080 agreement, and then approve the easements, there's also a 5-party agreement that we'll be talking about here shortly. It kind of ties into this. That 5-party agreement is the result of that sewer being constructed. It combines, crosses with ours, commingles, and when we're said and done, the Waukee will be transferring the northeast outfall sewer to the WRA. In addition, we'll be transferring a portion of the Clive district trunk that we have with the city of Urbandale to the WRA. Will relieve us of maintenance responsibilities, future lining responsibilities, and future replacement responsibilities. So overall, because it's now part of a combined system, the WRA will take it over, and we're recommending that we do that. The 5-party agreement is just the outline for what we have to do to actually transfer it. It's not the actual transferring at this time. Outlines that, basically we'll have to do some televising and then make any repairs to that line that are necessary. So with that, start with the first one, and that's the resolution approving the easement, and then move to the actual approval of the easements themselves. If there's any
We
questions,
have
be glad
questions
to
for
answer.
Jeff. Yes, go ahead, Eric.
Jeff, whose responsibility moving forward will be for sewer linings to that particular trunk?
For the WRA, or the northeast outfall, or the Clive district trunk that we're transferring,
Clive District trunk.
it will become the WRAs.
Okay.
They will have all maintenance and responsibilities for that once we transfer it to them.
Okay.
So,
Other questions? Ted?
I apologize, Jeff, I couldn't remember, and I didn't see any maps on here. Are there any homeowners that are impacted by these easements?
no, the easements that the Waukee acquired were totally within our green belt. They did not want to have to go through the process of working with homeowners, so it was laid out, and it's all within
So it's
ours.
all
Now,
just
some of these
ours.
temporaries, are right up against some boundaries there, but
they're
they're
not
not
actually on
not on any private property anywhere.
Okay, good, okay.
Other questions for Jeff?
Quick question. On the easements, kind of the width, right? I know it's going to depend on the access requirements, but I'm assuming we've done everything we can to keep that narrow to minimize impact.
Yeah, there's 2 easements. The permanent easement's a 30-foot wide easement, 15-foot on each side of the line. It basically allows them to get a piece of equipment in there and dig down and repair it if they need to, or do something like that. That's the permanent easement itself. Then there's temporary construction easements when they're installing it that'll be outside of that. We worked with and Richard and his team and everyone to look and minimize that as much as possible. With the size of this trunk, it wasn't possible to do a lot of it, but there was places they have narrowed it down to minimize the impacts to trees and to minimize the impacts to other properties in there. So in addition, there's some trees in there that we've identified that are actually within the easements themselves that they have to protect. They didn't get to just clear out the full width of the easements themselves, pretty much that way, but there's a few trees we did specify that they have to protect.
Other questions? If not, we're looking
Move
to
to close public hearing?
motion to close public hearing. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion. Seeing none, would the council please vote on closing the public hearing? And will the clerk please post that vote? That passes by a vote of 5-0.
Move to grant permanent easements and temporary easements to the city of Waukee for the Waukee Northeast Outfall Sewer.
We need to do A
Oh,
first.
sorry. I'm sorry, move the resolution approving the 2080 agreement with the city of Waukee.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the first resolution. Further discussion. If not, would the council please vote on the first resolution? And will the clerk please post that vote? 2080 agreement passes by a vote of 5-0.
And move the resolution granting permanent easements and temporary easement to the city of Waukee for the Waukee Northeast Outfall Sewer.
Second.
Motion and second on the second resolution. Further discussion? Seeing none, would the council please vote? And will the clerk please post that vote? And that passes by a vote of 5-0. Jeff, you're up for the next one as well.
Again, this is the approval of the five-party agreement that we discussed as part of that. Basically, upon completion of that project, we'd like to move that section of the Clive District trunk to the WRA. This
Jeff, you
outlines.
might want to describe too that this isn't the whole section. This is really Alice's Road East.
Yes, a portion of that goes on up, well, it's from the west end of the Clive District as it's defined. What we extended is not part of it, but then there's some branches that come off that we'll still have some responsibility for as part of that. But this is the main trunk that goes down through there, goes into Urbandale, and even the Clive District trunk in Urbandale, we have some responsibility for because we have flows in and it's based on a percentage of usage. So it's not the whole Clive District trunk, but it's the portion of the spine that will carry the flows from both ourselves, Waukee, and Urbandale after they combine.
Very good, Jeff.
Jeff, I did notice that for the city of Clive to build a trail on over that, the pipe right there, we have to seek approval from the WRA. Can you just clarify that and what that process would be?
When we get to the documents to actually transfer it, it says that we do have to seek approval, and the approval is not that we can't do it, it's just that we have to agree to build it to certain conditions to allow them to utilize the trail for access with vehicles and stuff. Same things we'd build it to for us. You know, in talking with Scott Hutchins, and with our attorneys, you know, we verified that no, they're not going to prevent it, but they do have the right to say you can't put a 4-inch trail in and tell us we're responsible for the damage. You're going to have to build it up a little bit. So, and we'd do it for ourselves because we're going to utilize this for some access to our mains potentially too.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Jeff on this?
Move to resolution.
Second.
A motion on the resolution and a second. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote? And would the clerk please post that vote? And the five-party agreement passes by a vote of 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Next is just a pay request from RDG. We just need a,
Move to approve pay request 8.
Second.
we have a motion and a second to approve that. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote? And that passes by vote of 4 with 1 abstention. Next, the fun part of the evening, we're going to talk about the budget.
So excited, Mayor, that you called it the fun part of the evening. So excited.
Aren't we all?
I heard that. All right, hang on, let me change my. Go ahead. Should be good.
Almost.
Oh, you actually already changed it.
There you go.
There. Oh, I guess you don't have to change it anymore. Good. Look at that. All right, Your Honor, members of the council, this is the second of 2 budget workshops related to the city manager's proposed 23-24 budget. Again, focused on the general fund and trust and agency fund, very similar to what we've done in years past. You'll have a collection of folks speaking before you tonight, all related to the general fund departments, both Liz and myself, as well as all of the department directors that are covered in the general fund. So what I'd like to start off with is a reminder of the financial strategies that we discuss and you all support during strategic planning. We talk about this, and this is really the guidance for me to put this budget together. And you see some of the highlights related to the 2 funds as well as property taxes. Again, what you're going to see tonight is a proposal to maintain the property tax levy at 1014 for the city and holding that rate for as long as we're able to. We'll also talk about some of the city's cash reserves and the ability to use that to manage that rate over the long term, particularly as towards the end of the presentation as we talk about some challenges that'll be coming at us from the Iowa legislature related to property tax and the residential rollback that is happening as we speak. And then targets related to general fund and reserve balances as a part of expenditures and transfers out. We'll be talking about that quite a bit too as we go through each various fiscal year and then ending in the actual proposed budget of 23-24. Also, one of the biggest pieces that the budget is supposed to represent is when you set your strategic priorities back in August, this budget is designed to represent those top priorities. And there's a collection of them here on the screen. Some of them are related to the capital improvements program that you adopted back in December. But a good chunk of that you'll hear about tonight are some of the things on this screen related to what it actually looks like to operationalize some of these priorities and putting the funding resources towards those priorities that you've set as top and high priorities in both either your policy agenda or the management agenda for staff. So again, you'll hear more about these items as we go throughout the presentation tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz to start walking through the trust and agency fund and the general fund. I'll get out of your way.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm going to talk about the trust and agency fund and the general fund in just a few slides to kind of summarize what we have proposed for you. Trust and agency, of course, is the property tax that pays for our employee health insurance, the city's general liability insurance, workers' compensation, and of course the police pension. It'll generate $2.6 million. And as you can see on the slide there, it also includes retiree insurance and reimbursement for employees per the personnel manual that we have in place. 7% is projected for the expenditures for the health insurance costs and those reimbursements from employees that are also paying for their insurance. But 7% increases moving forward. So if you look at the cash flow, you can see that we budgeted 7.5% projecting further out. The health benefits there's a couple new employees that we are proposing. One being the parks operations specialist and then the communication specialist as well. And then we're also proposing 3 part-time fire staff that will be eligible for health insurance based on their hours of work over 30 hours a week. Multiple tenured retired folks, as you know, are impacted in the insurance support here. And then this is a fund that we will definitely have to watch closely, monitoring in the future. What we do with the general fund is also kind of share what we have actually seen in fiscal year 22. And then the next couple slides are, of course, our current budget and what we're proposing. So here, the original projection that we were looking at is $182,000 surplus. But what we are actually, the actual audit was $1.82 million in surplus. There's a few reasons for that, and we've talked about these in previous meetings with Station 43 and the West Des Moines West Side Station that didn't bill us for the last quarter of that year. So that is why we're having to pay those in this fiscal year.
What was the cost that last quarter, Liz, that they didn't bill us for?
A little over 400,000, yeah.
500.
Yep. And then also, of course, with, there was additional expenses in salaries, and also a surplus. Well, and I was gonna say the expenditures that we budgeted for was 32.2%, but what we actually came out with was 48.4% surplus. So it was a very positive year for us. Now looking at the revised year, that explains those payments that we talked about. So we're expecting to use $371,000 in cash reserves, but we ended up utilizing $1.73 million in cash reserves. That probably looks a little poor, but $853,000 is what I was referring to there in those first 2 bullets, the $421,000 in salaries related to collective bargaining, and then also the carryover of those costs. Park and recreation expenses went up, but then on the other side too, we had some revenues that came in that were in addition to that. We have fewer expenses, thankfully, to the new contracts that we have for the animal control, going to Furry Friends in Polk County instead of having that contract with West Des Moines. And then there was some other fewer costs there with Westcom having an opening in their dispatch. So here we're showing the original budget was 371, and there's where we show you the revised budget. Again, at the end of the day, the cash balance is 37%, 37.5%. Okay. No questions there. I'll move on to the proposed budget. Excuse me.
Can we go back to that slide real quick?
Sure. Sure. Any
So
questions
that's a
there?
700,000 differential between the revised and original budget. Cash balance right there. It's a pretty big number.
It is.
Just walk me through again how we come up with that differential, if you would, please.
Sure, sure. And you can see a couple of those bullets up above there. Without getting those payments from the West Side Station, again, $431,000. And then those salary increases from collective bargaining, that just increased our budget as well. And again, that was kind of the amendment that we just took place earlier. And then, again, just a few of the fewer expenses. So it equals out to roughly revised dollar amount there.
To Eric's question,
Yeah.
in the carryover cost of the West Side Station, wouldn't that have been accounted for in the original budget just because it carried over to the next fiscal year? You would have had to have carried those numbers across, right?
In the actual year, 22, we came in with a surplus because we didn't make those payments. Because we did not make those final quarterly payments. So we did not get invoiced.
So it shows surplus of 431,000.
Well, in that previous one, we went for 1.8 in surplus.
Basically exacerbated our surplus in the previous fiscal year because we would have almost $500,000 worth of payments that we didn't have to make. We're a cash basis city. So even though we were a full accrual based city, yeah, that expense would have showed up, it had been audited back in the previous fiscal year. But because those two cities were late getting us invoices, they didn't send them to us till July. It transfers over. So we saved expenditures. We held on to that money, which is a good thing, right, for interest income, which Liz will talk about here in a minute in terms of, or I'll talk about a little bit on the revenue side. So we just paid it 2 months later than we normally would have. And so, but since it was on that fiscal year straddle, saved expenses in the previous fiscal year, but then we got to account for it in the current fiscal year. So that's really your difference, Councilmember Klein.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and actually here too, on this slide, it shows that we spent only 90% of the budget, so that always adds to the surplus of the budget as well. So I think we went through everything here on the revised. And then, so again, general fund is the main operating fund for the city, and it provides for the primary government activities of each of these departments, the public safety, public works, health and services, and culture and recreation, and also the community and economic development and general government. So this current year, we have a full-time equivalent count of 136.2 employees. Just for a reference, in 2017, we had 121.2, and then in last year, we had 135.2. So we have a couple proposed staff additions, like we talked about Park and Rec Ops, and then also the communication specialist position. Right now, if you look at the bullet there about underneath the 136 there, that's 10% growth community and 10% growth in our employees, our FTEs as well. The current year, like I said, is going to add those two folks, and it kind of shares there when they would get started. Our levy rate, we're proposing to keep it at $10.14. The general fund levy being $7.22. Our general fund is 71% of the total revenues in the general fund as a primary source.
Go back to the last slide, the revised one, please.
You bet. Question there?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so next is our department slides, and so each of the departments are going to share their short and their long-term issues and budget requests. And I'm going to stay up here for just one more slide with you. Our department, Department of Administrative Services, it provides the municipal services and records management for Clive. We have 9 full-time employees. We're in the middle of doing our reorganization in the department, doing a lot of cross-training. And many of those short-term initiatives that we're working on is the fire chief recruitment, which is already underway, as well as the R&R, the recruitment and retention program. Along with that, we are continuing our wellness and benefits. And then, as you know, with NeoGov, we have added not just the onboarding, but also the Learn module, which is for training, and the Perform module for the evaluation. So those things are going to come in front of you. I'm sure we'll be doing a process improvement to show you all the wonderful things that that does for us. We have really no significant capital equipment or budget requests, other than we did request at the strategic planning to promote our administrative assistant to the deputy city clerk, which would provide some good specialized assistance for our city clerk in his daily duties as well. So, and along with that would be additional education certification in small increase. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah.
Good evening. The Clive Police Department is proud to be the primary law enforcement agency for the city of Clive. This year, our major expenditures, personnel, as always, is the major part of our expenditure. We've gone up to authorized strength of 29 full-time sworn officers, 3 full-time civilians, and 4 part-time civilians, 2 of those being crossing guards who are paid for by the West Des Moines School District. That 29th officer, as you recall, a couple months ago, we talked about adding the CIT team. That did start up January 1st. And at the end of the first month of operation, they were active 20 days during the month of January. They served 12 unique individual cases during that time, and 18 hours with those 12 people. So that's an average of an initial call, an hour and a half with each of those people who are in mental health crisis. 16 referrals for mental health services, and more than 8 hours of follow-up. What those statistics are great, but what they don't say are some very touching stories I've heard already from this team of individuals that they've been able to reach who were lost, and get them to at least started on the road to recovery, get them to the treatment services they need. And this is just in the first month while they are learning their jobs and working together. So I'm very excited how this is going to go, and appreciate the fact that you allowed us to move forward with that program. Other current trends and yes.
I think you mentioned 12 unique or 16 unique.
12 unique calls for service and 16 unique individuals. Some of those may have just been on a phone call basis.
Okay. How many, do you have a number on repeat?
No, I do not have that. I could find that out for you, but that is a very common occurrence. That's why they told me 12 unique people instead of the number of different people that they talked to, because
I think it shows your numbers good. I'd like to see the repeat. I think it adds to the argument of why this unit should be there, right? Because building those relationships and not having the full police force going every time, you kind of know who it is.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. Those familiar faces in the past, those were what really were a draw on police services, people we know, but that we were spinning our wheels and not being able to get them the help they need. Our team is learning this month a lot of resources, where to direct people. And every day it seems like they're learning a new place for people to turn, whether it's adult, whether it's a kid. Every situation is different, everyone's needs are different, and I'm very excited what they're showing already. And this team is very dedicated in developing this program and giving a good blueprint for the next people to follow in later years.
Chief, I was really happy to see that our CAT officer, Officer Recchia, does not wear her uniform
No.
on these calls right there. And that's I guess I really didn't think about that, but that's a great idea right there. Obviously, she's armed. Obviously, she has ballistic protection, but I could see that right in itself could really de-escalate a situation when some folks might have a problem with the uniform, et cetera. So really glad to see that.
Yeah, that uniform can be a big trigger for some people. We also use only an unmarked car. And for safety, both her and our social worker both wear ballistic vests under their clothes because these are still dangerous situations, but both of them have the right personality, the right drive and the right caring attitude for people to take on this task. And you should be very proud of that team. And as we go forward, I look forward to telling you more and more success stories from them. Okay, moving on, the next big budget item is the flock safety cameras. Again, we talked about these a couple months ago. We are in the process of getting those cameras installed. A number of them are installed, and even before, so the trial hasn't started till the last camera is installed, but we have already been able to pick up a felony warrant off of an indication. We're able to find a car that triggered one of the flock cameras. An officer found that car and took somebody to jail for a felony warrant. So we're looking forward to good things there. And again, I will be reporting back to you after the end of the 60-day trial period and let you know how it's going, if we want to continue, and if so, how many cameras. We have, again, earmarked or just a placeholder, 25,000. That's enough to have 10 cameras on an ongoing basis.
Chief,
Yes,
could you remind me, how many cameras are in the trial?
20 cameras are in the trial. So we got 14 installed right now, and I think the weather has kind of slowed down installation, but we're looking forward to having those last 6 installed, because there's a couple locations that I really would like to have a camera there, because I know it's a location that that gives us a lot of trouble. We're going to find a lot of good information from that for our especially for our detectives doing follow-up investigations.
Assuming the trial goes according to plan and goes well, what's the timeline or the process to go from the trial to the just the annual subscription or whatever that model is?
So the plan is, after the 60-day trial, let's say we choose 10 cameras and we want to go forward, then what we will owe is from the beginning of the 60-day trial forward for those 10 cameras only. The other 10 cameras that we say go away, there's never any charge for that. And to get us through until our next approved budget between that time and July 1, I'm going to be using drug seizure money. We've kept a balance in that account for things that come up that we haven't budgeted for, and our plan is to cover that until July. So then once July 1 comes, we'll have that ongoing money available for ongoing costs.
Yeah, so we get 10 months after the 60-day trial period, is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to try to work to get into our budget cycle. They expressed a willingness to say, if you want to pay a partial amount between the trial period and July, they can figure that out, and then going forward, let's say every July we'll have that money available for that year's subscription.
Chief, refresh my memory. Say we do go forward with the 10 cameras and everybody's happy with that. What if we have one camera that we want to move right there? will they move for free? Is it an extra cost? How does that work on the contract?
Moving is, a camera is at our expense, and the contract does lay out costs for moving that. If a camera gets knocked down, let's say a car runs into it, it's a leased camera. The camera gets damaged, it's at their cost to put that back up. If a camera is out of service and a service technician isn't able to get here, we've discussed, there was a few cameras that Urbandale had that weren't, they didn't have what was called a penguin pack that was, had them prepared for really cold weather. And they had some cameras that went out in really cold weather. So they gave credit back to Urbandale for those cameras while they were out of service. And all of ours are installed with the extra cold protection, the penguin packs, extra solar panels, and extra heating for some of the batteries, so.
If I'm recalling correctly, there were a couple items that we were gonna kind of revisit when we got to the point of if we want to move forward with like a longer-term agreement. So would you see that happening as the part of that partial term that you were talking about, or part of the,
So-
when we get to that July?
My plan would be, by the end of the 60-day trial, we'll figure out when that 60-day trial starts, and I'll look for a council session that's going to come up right, before the end of our trial, and I'll report to you at that time the data that we've been able to recover and any solves that we've had, and our recommendation whether to go forward and with how many cameras. We come back to you, and at that point, we'll be able to get a nod from you to go ahead with whatever that agreed amount is.
But I think what Srikant's also talking about is we're gonna need some lead time, because I think this council discussed some policies and internal policies and procedures around those, not just the nod of yes. Is that kind of where you were headed with that?
Yeah, a little bit that and the contract.
Contract.
When we were talking about that, there was a couple of provisions that we just said, let's just hold off until we see how the trial goes. But I'm not remembering what it was exactly.
Yeah, I remember Councilmember McElhaney had a couple items that we wanted to try to clean up in the longer-term agreement. But to Councilmember McCoy, to your policy point, we're going to be sharing that with you even during the trial period. So I've reviewed the flock camera internal police policy with the chief, had a few requests on a couple reporting things that I wanted to see. And then once he has that amended, when we start the trial period, my intent is to share it with you all. It's an internal policy, so it's council's choice of whether that's something that you want to adopt formally. Typically with police department policies, it's reviewed by the chief and I and approved that way. If there's something different you'd like to see, welcome that direction. But we will be sharing that with you here relatively soon, and appreciate the chief's work on it. It's very thorough in terms of the security and who has access to what. I just merely added some reporting to the city manager that I'd like to see, especially in this first year on a regular basis. Those will be things that we'll also share with the council at the same time. So it's very minor changes, but we're going to be sharing that with you shortly.
We wanted to have that policy in place because our officers are currently working with it. So I didn't want to wait until the end of a trial period to get a policy in place. As we do on all other police activities, we have a number of policies and procedures to guide and control our officers. So they have a policy in place now, and as Matt said, we'll let you have a look at that, and if you have any input on that policy going forward. But that is what's in place right now for our first trial.
Hey, Chief, when you come back to us with stats and metrics, can you make sure that we're also identifying any, not just the solves and all the positives, but if there are any, falsely identified metrics, anything like that, so we can have a complete picture?
Will do. I'll make a note of that right now.
Appreciate it.
Okay, any more questions on Flock? The next significant area is equipment. A lot of our equipment budget is vehicles. As you recall, we have a previously agreed on replacement schedule for marked patrol squad cars every 3 years, and for detective cars and administrative cars every 6 years. And we usually replace 2 to 5 cars every year. And in FY '23-24, we're scheduled to replace a total of 3 SUVs and 2 patrol sedans. Additionally, at that same time, we're at about the end of life to our body cams and in-car cameras. I think last week Matt shared with you a good find that Lieutenant Rayberg had to help stretch out the time we've been able to use our body cams. Our body cams are end of life. The L3 will no longer support them. If they break down, they won't fix them anymore. And this came as a surprise to us when we sent off some cameras and they came back and said, sorry, we don't support those anymore. We'd be glad to have you buy the next generation. So Lieutenant Rayberg, with a connection we had through the FBI National Academy Associates, found out that the Dubuque Police Department was moving from L3 to Axon body cameras. And we inquired if we could buy some of their old body cameras if they're going to be up for sale. They gave us all of their body cameras. So he's been going through the box, finding the ones that still work. So when they break down, we can't get them fixed. They get tossed, and we have a supply of other ones. That's going to keep us going for a while. These body cameras and in-car cameras don't have editing software, things that we really need for the future. They don't sync up with each other. Our storage is all in-house on our own server. The industry is moving away from agencies owning their own servers, and it's all going to cloud-based storage and editing. We're going to need to move that way, so we've put a placeholder starting next year of about $50,000 at a minimum over every year for over 5 years. That technology is getting more complex, and as it gets more complex, it doesn't get any cheaper. But as we've seen across the country, those body cameras are an essential tool for our officers. We've had them in place in Clive. We were the first in the metro to have them starting, I think, in 2014. We're in about our 4th generation, and it's time to move forward with that. But that does come with a pretty high price tag. So, questions on that?
When you say it's just a placeholder, have we done the research to know what we're looking at?
We are in the process of researching different platforms. That placeholder number came from some of our preliminary research last year on what an example system would cost, but now we're comparing 3 different platforms. And as you know, as the longer we hold out, you know, we can stretch out what we have right now, but those prices are not gonna go down. The technology keeps getting pricier and pricier, but we're trying to plan to get the best system that we can to collect the most evidence, to keep our officers safe, and to keep them accountable as well to the public and to you.
Why I would call it a placeholder is the chief, and as he shared, is doing that analysis, put together a full evaluation, and that will come back before you for a decision. We've got 3 different, our current vendor and 2 others that we're looking at. That 50,000 year placeholder is also, we're uncertain how much is in our capital equipment budget, how much would actually be in the operating budget, because again, a big chunk of this, and we're talking $250,000 at minimum for these systems now, a large chunk of that is the data storage. And with them all going to cloud-based data storage, there's subscriptions, there's maintenance agreements. Sherkan's shaking his head. There's a lot of things, just like we talked about with Flock, that's going to go with that. And that's going to be more of an IT operational budget expense going forward. The cameras themselves won't be as expensive. It might be, they're more expensive than what we bought in the past, but it's really that data storage side that's huge. And so what's nice for us, the one nice thing is what we're using today in-house can be repurposed. If we do go to a cloud-based system that we can repurpose for other systems, other servers, we can spin those up and turn it into storage for other things that we use in the city. So it's not, what we have today isn't lost. We can repurpose it. but they're really going to this cloud-based system, and it's us being comfortable with that and the analysis that will go along with that and a recommendation coming back to you. But we're not ready for that yet. We know it'll be a number of months, so we wanted to at least have a placeholder in the budget to understand that. But I will tell you, in this space, the equipment costs are going up exponentially. And that on top of our normal inflation that we're seeing with vehicles, and you'll hear this later from me in the general fund proposed budget on the expenditure side, we significantly increased by over 100,000 the general fund's contribution to our capital equipment budget. Because we basically have an internal fund bank over here that we put money in from the general fund and road use and the utilities to support all of our capital equipment replacements. And it's just not keeping pace at the level, the 5% per year increase that we were giving it from all the funds. So the general fund needed to make a substantial jump. And it's because of projects like this. And then what's coming next year that I mentioned in my memo is the radio replacements for both police and fire. These are $250,000 price tags for each one of these pieces. So, but they're necessary, and they're things that we have to consider, and we're trying to keep pace with those expenses.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the radios. So for both the radios and for the cameras, is this a one-time, like, are we doing the purchase all at once, or are we doing it as some of the older equipment dies and we replenish it with new?
So the radios are a little bit interesting. So we're going to be hitting about that 14, 15-year mark. It's amazing how fast, or 12, 13-year mark with our radio system, our new digital radio system. It's amazing. It didn't seem that long ago that we put that system in. Part of the reason we have it in the budget where it's at is there is a very lucrative state purchasing agreement that is currently in place with Motorola for all those radios. That expires at the end of that fiscal year, the next, not this one, the budget that we're talking about, but 24, 25. So all of the Westcom cities have been talking about this to take advantage of that much better pricing, because as soon as that year goes away, the cost of those radios are going to substantially go up. So we're all kind of planning to, we know we need to replace them around that same time period. Let's take advantage of the good state pricing before it expires with Motorola. So that's why we're all trying to budget, and it hasn't been in there before, because it would have been about the same year or a year ahead of schedule, but we know we got that really good pricing.
Purchasing all of it at once, then.
Yeah, purchasing it, all of it at once, and then we'll have to make a decision going forward if those 13, 14-year replacement cycles, are we gonna start to do things in pieces? Because a lot of what's a struggle with the radio systems, and I'm speaking a little out of turn, the chiefs can speak to it better than I, but the programming and the encryption and things like that go with these radios, a lot of times you have to do them all at once. On the public safety side, it's hard to just replace them over time. And especially when you have in-car, you got radios in the vehicles, and then there are mobiles on them, or they're portables on them. So we're trying to figure out what the best rhythm is, but we know we've got this small window of a good pricing for replacement that, I can't remember, chiefs, if you remember, it's like 30, 40%. 50%. Or 50%.
50% off of their normal.
Off of the normal price. So, and just to give you a frame of reference, the radio replacements for both police and fire individually is $250,000 at that 50% discount. Those radios are $4 to $5 grand a piece, $3 to $4 grand a piece, something like that.
But they don't
Am I right
break.
on that?
They're.
Oh, yours is, yeah, and fire's is a
Let my
little
kids
more
play with it for a little while. They'll burn it.
expensive. But they're very expensive. I mean, they're basically little mini computers now. So some of it's that we just have had bad timing of these things kind of coming all at once. And that's where getting the cameras from Dubuque is very helpful. That at least gives us options on timing. Of course, there's always a desire in terms of having better flexibility in terms of software editing tools and things like that when we have to release video, body cam videos, things like that. But it's really going to be, we're going to bring that back to you and say, okay, here's our analysis. Here's whether we think it's the right time and what system, and have that full evaluation for you.
As part of that evaluation that, Chief and you were mentioning, is there a component where Dennis or somebody in the IT department is going to be involved and say, look, this is a cloud-based storage. It's obviously, it's basically an outside controlled IT system. How are we managing that? What's the process going to be?
Yeah,
Yes.
and we've been chatting with them as we go, talking about like was it a 10 terabyte server that we have right now for our video, and if we could reuse that. And we always consult with them because they help us do a lot of the internal maintenance, especially on the cameras, not so much
on the radios, but on our camera systems. Another point on why we would want to replace them all at once, most of the units are all aged the same. The radios were all bought in 2013, 2013.
2012 or 2013.
So they're heading up 10, 11 years old.
Today.
So they get to a point where they start to break down a lot. So the same thing with most of our in-car and our body cams, they're all aged the same. So changing them out a few at a time would give us a lot of different ages and would have different sorts of software that may not work together. Our storage system for video, we're hoping to go to a storage system that's going to give us editing capabilities, and the old cameras may not work with that. So plus if we start replacing and doing installations, it's more cost effective to get them all done at one time instead of just picking and choosing as we go. But we understand that this is a big bite and it takes a lot of consideration.
One thing to keep in mind with some of the cloud storage, especially if it's tied to the camera vendor, which they typically are, you are a bit beholden to them, right? So if they come back and say, hey, sorry, we don't do the L3, now they're saying, hey, sorry, we don't do that, we don't allow that to upload to our camera, or we don't allow those camera to upload to our system anymore. It's an artificial limitation that they do that.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons the last iteration we did on our L3 in-car and body cams, cloud-based was being offered at that time, and I was resistant to it. I wanted to keep it in-house because of that reason. Well, there's another reason not to do it. They won't support the actual hardware anymore. So
We all have Apple phones, we get it.
I can tell you in this vendor space, though, it is becoming very difficult.
Yeah, no,
The proprietary of this
Yeah, no.
particular vendor space, there isn't many alternatives, and that's
Yeah,
what
I
makes me
mean,
nervous.
The
is-
IT market in general is moving away from, everything's moving to that subscription model. You don't own anything, you just rent or lease it, right?
Right.
But it's still something to keep in mind when
Right.
we may not get 10 or 11 years out of the next round. We may be artificially constrained to say, okay, we're stopping support after 5 years, so you guys figure it out.
Right. I'm concerned about the costs in this space. We do not have a whole lot of control over it, and there isn't a whole lot of vendors to choose from. And what is difficult is this is a very critical system for today's day and age of law enforcement. And so we have to, it's between a rock and a hard place on a lot of this stuff. One thing I'll also mention too, on the vehicle side, we're also playing catch up on some of our patrol vehicle replacements. We had the previous fiscal year, we weren't able to make any vehicle replacements because we couldn't get any cars. And so this year, we're playing catch up, and also this fiscal year. And then we got to do some reshuffling of the whole fleet that Liz and Chief will be working on this summer, because we got so far behind where we normally do that 2 to 5 replacements, and we could not get it. We actually had orders canceled on us because of the supply issues in our previous fiscal year. So we do have some catch up to do there.
Yeah, man, that was my question too, Chief, with the inability to procure those vehicles and why the larger number this year. How does that change your, 3-year rotation right there without being able to do that? You guys, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah, we like to keep it fairly even, 2 to 5, so we're not impacting that CEP budget too much. What we've noticed though, because we had a year where we didn't expend any of those funds, we moved those funds forward. This year, the cars are coming in, we're starting to buy them, so that's gonna make a big peak and then a valley. So we've talked about as future years, when choosing certain cars, to hold on to them for another year, start to level that plane out again, so we don't have as many peaks and valleys. So as we smooth that out, we'll do it by holding on to cars that are working well, holding on for a little longer, and not like purchase sooner, so to flatten it out. But that's a discussion yet to come, I hear.
If you're comfortable with your ammunition budgets and training, de-escalation training, that type of thing, you're comfortable with the numbers that you have?
Yeah, we're doing very good on that. We've expanded into a lot of online training, which is saving us staff hours to travel to training or bring trainers in. And it's allowing officers to do, I just took some de-escalation training online the other day. I mean, all of us have had the basic training. We just need some refresher as we go and to follow state law for bias-based training and de-escalation training. That helps us do that very cost effectively.
Thank you.
All right?
How does a totaled vehicle impact the process?
How does a totaled vehicle?
Totaled.
That's yet to be figured out because the cost of that, what was left of the life of that vehicle, the car that got totaled had about a year left. We weren't going to ask to replace that for a while, so we had to replace it with one of the new ones that came in. So we'll have to make a determination how that goes. That money is going to go back into the general fund from our insurer. And it doesn't, we never come out as winners in the police department on that, I don't think, on a totaled car.
Other questions?
Anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Mayor and Council, this is my 24th and last budget presentation. I scanned the room. Denny, John, and Doug would have been the only three that were here for whatever I fumbled through 24 years ago, but everybody's been kind.
Find a way to rope you in.
For the fire department budget, we're a staff of 50 people, 20, thank you, Matt.
24 years.
I was waiting on somebody to change that. And
Use technology.
we didn't have computers 24 years ago. So it takes about 50 people to run the operations. That's 20 full-time, and we fluctuate around 30 part-time. So that's administrative staff and us trying to have 6 people on duty 24 hours a day. Our current trends, employee recruitment, retention, and staffing, like a lot of other areas, the supply chain of qualified staff is thin. So we'll talk about some ideas that we have on that coming up. Service delivery and collaborations, in addition to the closest unit response that we do with our neighbors. We have the contractual services with Urbandale Station 43 and West Des Moines Station 22. And with Station 22, we've got some interesting changes coming up, and that'll be the second slide that we talk in detail about. Paramedic training, that really relates back to the first bullet. One of the things we've run into from a recruiting standpoint is not having enough paramedics available. So as a lot of other departments in the metro have done, we've entered into arrangements where we'll pay people back. We'll hire them without their paramedic training and then pay them back over a 3-year period as they stay with us. So depends on the year. In this proposed budget, during different points of the year, we've still got paybacks going. So we'll have 5 people that we're paying back at different points. The year after that, we're only projecting paying back 2, but that kind of fluctuates a little bit every year, but it's just part of our market and things that we need to do to attract people. Foam replacement and public safety drone, those are things that we're in the current process of doing. Just kind of typical equipment upgrades. On the significant budget requests, we've got a staff vehicle that the chief drives. That's $60,000. That's about $30,000 for the vehicle and about $30,000 for technology, installations, lettering, that kind of stuff. But anymore, just as Mike has, the technology and the apparatus is just about, if not more expensive than what the vehicle itself is. On the bottom bullet is kind of our creative approach this year to recruitment, retention, and staffing. We've got, with the 30 part-time people we have, we've got 8 people that are interested in working more than what we allow them to work right now. We keep them under 30 hours because we would, under the Affordable Health Care Act, we need to offer them health care insurance. So we've taken a look at this because these are, of these 8 people that are interested in working more than that, that's trained, ready to go people, ready, willing, and able to do more, but we've limited because of that. So we looked at it and said, what if we offer them healthcare benefits? What would that do for our operations? And at doing of those eight folks, we project that would take us where we've been averaging full staffing about 66% of the time for the last 2 years. That would fill enough shifts, if everything else remained constant, that we'd be up around 90%. Our part-time staff kind of ebbs and flows over the time. In the budget with that 56,000, that's what we've estimated it would cost if 3 of the part-time people actually wanted and took the insurance benefits. Currently, we think there's only 1 that will do that. When we were looking at this and working on this 6 months ago, we thought there were 3 people. So in the budget, our best guess is a max of 3 would want it, but it would do a lot for our staffing. So to expand further, what is that 90% staffing? What does that really mean? In 2022, we averaged 5 mandatory overtime shifts a month, and that's a lot. In prior years, we'd average 1 or 2. And anytime you're getting into mandatory overtime, somebody's got to change their schedule because, whether they're working another job, whether it's childcare, whatever it is they're working on, that's, you're basically forcing them to work time that they weren't interested in and didn't plan on. So that's tough on morale. So if we can reduce that, that would have a big impact. And the other thing it does with keeping us at full staffing, it keeps our engineer ladder staffed at 4 people. And that's important because when you do go to a fire type environment, one person's usually left as the engineer with the truck. And if you're down to 3, that leaves 2 people if they're engaged in operating a hose line. So probably more detail than you want, but the hose lines that we pull when they're full of water are very heavy. You could be going upstairs, downstairs, you're going in a house, around doors and things. And when you're at 2 people, you've really kind of taken your supervisor, your leader out of that leadership role and turned them into a worker. So they're less apt to pay attention to the safety elements going on with the fire. And I truly believe it does create a safety factor. So we want to be at that point where 90% of the time we're at full staffing. We know it's probably not realistic to be 100%. This effort with staffing, I think, would go a long way.
So what happens if, let's say 5 of those part-timers want to go above? Would we basically say, hey, only the first 3, or how would that work?
Got to allow them all to do it.
Yeah, I think it'd be.
There's a risk.
Yeah.
There's a risk.
Yeah. Most of our part-timers have full-time jobs elsewhere. So we've kind of scrubbed that risk pretty hard. So I think I would be very, very surprised if we went over 3. Yep.
Well, and if they have a full-time job somewhere else, presumably they have health insurance.
Exactly, yep.
Through them, and they couldn't do it through both, right? I mean, I don't think you can.
Again, the one risk you run is they could decline their full-time and take ours.
But they would have to know that in advance
Right.
for the year.
For the year, for their renewal, yeah.
Which, yeah, I think you're right.
But
That's
there's
pretty
the
minimal
risk of that potentially happening, but we feel
Well,
3 is a reasonable number.
I know we're getting a bit into the weeds, but I think if you do that, there is a provision that allows you to, the secondary employer to file a to file a fee on that because they're declining a different, available insurance. But again, probably getting into the
That's
weeds
good
there.
for their other employer.
Yeah, well,
Not
no,
necessarily for us.
Well, it makes our plan less attractive.
Right,
It
right, 'cause then they'd have to pay.
disincentivizes them from.
Correct,
yeah.
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Any other questions on the part-time staffing consideration? Okay. With the West Side Station, one of the things that we've worked on is we've got overlapping coverage with Station 32 moving west and with Station 43 contracted to cover the Dallas County portions of Clive, so everything west of 142nd. We have some overlapping coverage. So between that overlapping coverage and looking at trying to control some costs, we're working on renegotiating with West Des Moines to move to to shrink or reduce our reliance on Station 22 to be between the interstate and 142nd. And that will essentially cut their responses in half to Clive. They're getting busier in West Des Moines, and they're looking to do some other things with removing the they want to get out of doing inspections and some other things in Clive and just let it be purely emergency response. So in negotiating this with West Des Moines, right now we're projecting $300,000 a year savings. Our coverage areas on 32, or the area east of the interstate, that is fully covered by Station 32. The part west of 142nd, we're in that worst case scenario, about 6.5 minute response in there. So city as a whole, our goal is to cover a 6-minute drive time in 90% of the area. That keeps us within that goal.
So Chief, everything west of 142nd will be covered by Station 43 then?
Yes, that'll be their primary response area.
Yeah, that would be first due. So if 43 is out of station, then 22 would be tripped. Same thing with 32.
Yep.
And if 22 is out of station, 42 from Urbandale, which isn't shown on the screen, could be coming into. So this is just first due call response.
And as council members, you're kind of concerned or questioning that west area, the CAD is a whole bunch of if-then statements. And one of the things we build in is we don't want Station 32 driving all the way across Clive to handle those calls. So Waukee actually factors into that as well, that if we have a response time that is outside of what we want it to be and Waukee's available, it'll actually pull them in. And they've always been a good partner doing that with us.
We're in the middle of these negotiations right now. We've gone back on a couple offers, counter offers. It's now in West Des Moines court to come back with some proposed language on kind of where we settled on things. My hope is that we see that here in the month of February and then bring that forward to you in the month of March. So right now, we just have an estimate in there. We think we're going to be around this number. There's also a credit that we're seeking for them dropping inspections and public events out of Station 22. So, because there's a value to that, that we're receiving today. So that's all in the negotiations right now that we're working on with West Des Moines. We both want to get this done relatively soon because we're both in our budget processes. So hopefully here in the next month.
Will you be speaking on the Windsor Heights side tonight? Do you have a slide on that?
I do not have anything on Windsor Heights.
Are we going to write that at any time or write the response back and forth? How we going to get paid? They get paid, however that works out. I'm hearing it's a little weighted to one side.
It's not as bad as what some folks have thought it is.
Okay.
We respond into Windsor Heights a little more than they respond into Clive, but it's, I'm going off memory of the monthly reports. For about every 8 times we go into Windsor, they come to us about 6.
Oh.
So it's fairly weighted. There's some times where they've had some staffing issues where they've taken some equipment out of service. I'm not sure that's really fair to us. And in knowing that and taking a harder look at the numbers, I thought the numbers would be worse than what they were, and they haven't been. But it's certainly something that I know the city manager keep a keen eye on.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. I'll go ahead and get started on the leisure services. I've got 3 total slides here, but feel free to stop me at any point. One thing I kind of want to recognize right up front, I can't do this without the 23 full-time, the 4.5 full-time equivalent. So that's our library assistants, our shelvers. So that 4.5 FTE actually equates to about 20 to 30 part-time employees that are helping us do programming here at the library. They're staffing the library, and they're doing a ton of work over at the Harbach Center. So really a key part of our staff that really just doesn't look like a lot there, but it's really represented by a lot of people. And then almost 150 seasonal people that help us operate the aquatic center, do summer programs, and really just offer all the recreation program we do each year. Couple things on the current trends and issues in here. I went into a lot more depth as this is kind of the first check-in with the council regarding the Harbach Center since we opened in May. So try to go a little bit more depth into what we've been doing out there, who we've been making contact with, some of the partnerships that we've formed. And then also what we've tried to do is, as part of this budget cycle, start to identify what are all the total costs it takes to operate that facility. So working with Matt and Elizabeth and Corey, we've been able to set up what we call a community center budget, where all the expenses for the Harbach Center are being tracked, from the heating and cooling to the staff cost to any of the programming costs to buying library books, what we need to operate and do our programs. So we were able to put that together for the first time. We estimate it's about $163,000 budget to do that every year. That includes a majority of that goes to the sunk costs of what it takes to heat, cool, and maintain that building. That comes with the contracts for the boilers and the HVAC stuff that we have with Baker. It's about $50,000 to do 20 hours of operation per week out there, programming beyond that as well. And then about $39,000 in library material costs and programming costs, and $8,000 in recreation programming costs. A couple slides later, I have a little bit more on some of the kind of metrics that we've done, and also quite a few in the memo itself. Also, the next one here under the current issues and trends is the new natural resources team. Emet Cutter, as the first member of that team, proposed to promote one of the existing ops specialists as well as hire another one in January of 2024. So that would complete that natural resource team that's really going to undertake a lot of the water resources work that we've been doing, the things that you're seeing on Clark Street, the new detention basins and ponds that we've taken on in Shadow Creek, a lot of the natural resource work that we're doing in the green belt, and then things like the public safety facility, the bioswales, and all those areas up there. Go ahead.
We can go back there.
Yeah.
On that library program cost, are we purchasing new materials then? Are we overflow materials from our regular library? How does that work?
Yep, so it's a combination of new materials that, a lot of the popular things that are popular here are going to be popular over there. So we looked at, could you take some of the materials here? And it just doesn't work that way. You really just kind of need some of the same materials. So that's where a big chunk of that cost come from.
I have one comment. I know we're really just getting ramped up at Harbach, but at some point, I think it would be interesting to see how the costs are panning out on a per user basis at Harbach and here at this location, just so we can evaluate some of the cost benefit.
Yeah, I think we would be able to do that. Obviously they be an estimate to a certain degree because we don't keep track 100%. Like when people come to bounce houses, it's kind of hard to keep how many kids are coming and going and have unique counts, but we can get you pretty close as we start to continue to track those metrics and put that together.
And I'm especially interested in the library services.
Absolutely.
So we have a sense of it.
Yeah, we can start to get that put together and get that ready. Yeah.
So if we're open 20 hours a week, it's about $150 an hour.
I'm not good at math on my head, so I'll trust you on that one.
That's based upon your costs of $163,470 per year, divided out by 20 hours open per week, 52 weeks.
There you go.
I'm with Richard. I'm just going to believe you.
So moving on to significant budget requests. So starting with our equipment replacements, the first one we have on there is a 15-passenger van. This is a van that we use for our summer camps. These are our very, very popular summer camps that sell out usually within the first day. This is something we've actually been trying to replace for the last 2 budget years, but the pandemic and now the popularity of trucks and electric vehicles, most of the manufacturers are really just putting the build of these type of things on a very low priority basis. We've been checking in with Stivers and Stu Hansen and pretty much anyone that makes one of these things, and we just haven't been able to find it.
Are there any options to go like the EV route or anything like that, or?
They're not making, basically, they're not making very many or putting it at a very low priority to even manufacture regular or electric versions of these. That's been the biggest problem, is we just can't get them to have enough that we could purchase one. I think we'd be absolutely willing to look at electric, but we just can't find anything. I mean, they're, Ford's producing how many hundreds of thousands of, F-150s, electric and regular, and so they've just put this at a low end. So the hope is maybe in the next year that this will catch up and we can actually get one ordered.
But really, how many miles do you put on one of those passenger vans on a year basis to parks?
Ultimately, these are probably pretty low vehicles by the time, we get to the replacement. And we've even pushed them past kind of a typical replacement because they are low miles. The next one that we have proposed for replacement is one of our 3/4 ton trucks. It's time for a replacement of that. Replacing a 16-foot trailer with a 20-foot trailer. That's the lifespan of the trailer has passed, but with the new forestry mower that we now have in our possession, it's a little bit heavier, so we just need a little bit longer and heavier duty trailer for that. So replacing that 16-foot with a 20-foot. Annual park and trail signage replacement. So we're still continuing to work through the system to get those new signs out there. And then this year's allocation of the aquatic center improvements of $77,000. So we'll be in year 2 of that 5-year plan that the council approved last year.
That mower made it in?
What's that?
That mower made it?
We finally got it. It was actually 2 budget cycles ago. It just showed up here about a month ago.
Can you break down the aquatic center improvements you have planned for 2023?
So a couple things that we're working on. We are getting a new diving board replaced for this year. We've gotten the frame for that repowder coated, so that looks good. Replacing 2 of the pumps in the pump room to make sure that those run well and we don't have any breakdowns and we lose any time there. Finishing up pool painting on the lazy river, and I believe that covers it. HVAC improvements to the lifeguard area. So those we'll have open by this year. That will be replaced already. Yep. I just don't think that was included in the CEP portion of it.
I won't have to send in more pictures.
No, I understand that for sure.
$10 at Walmart.
Yeah.
Here's the whole thing.
One of the things that the city manager has asked us to do in kind of looking at overall our equipment and how we operate the department, evaluate, as we come up towards replacements and as we start to develop this natural resources team, what do we need? Are there new pieces of equipment? And so one of the things that we've done is identified a new piece of equipment that would be valuable for a lot of different things that we do, but really focused on a lot of the natural resource, water resource work that we do. We're proposing to add to our fleet a mini track loader. This is basically a much smaller version of a skid loader / loader that can be used in a lot of tighter spaces that we've been working in. We do a lot of work up against private properties in the Greenbelt. We're starting to work in the bioswales and some of those natural resource areas. So proposing a smaller piece of equipment that could really fit into there and be a valuable tool for the work that we're doing and this team that we are building.
Lifespan on that?
Probably in the 7 to 10 year range. We don't, not having one yet, but I would guess probably the 10-year range. One of the things also too that we've been doing just kind of along that CEP line, we reevaluated when we should replace some things. One thing that is in the current budget that we did regarding that was the toolcat. That's probably our most used piece of equipment. And originally it was on a 10-year time frame, and we were starting to see a lot of repairs and costs associated with that. And so we realized it was probably appropriate to adjust that to a 7-year replacement. So that's something that we replaced in the current budget. We'll look at that as a lot of our other pieces of equipment come up, I think related to the van discussion, some of those things. And even some of the pieces of equipment we have when the time comes for replacement or renewal, do we need that piece of equipment anymore? One of the things we've kind of identified several years out, still before it comes up in the replacement, is a tractor that we have. Would that make sense to replace that with a second tool cat? So we're trying to, as we go through this process, evaluate, do we have the right pieces of equipment to make sure that we can do the job as efficiently as possible?
Commissioner, if I could add to that too, one of the things happening right now is bringing the Parks team into the Lucity platform that Public Works uses. As part of that also, we're standing up the fleet module within Lucity as well, so that over time we can get even more informed about making these decisions about when's the right replacements timing, what is the value left, projected value left in these pieces of equipment. So it doesn't happen overnight, but incrementally we're starting to make improvements, I think, definitely with the work order process and understanding the resources necessary and the cost of doing different types of activities. As Parks gets into Lucity, we're going to have really good data.
We like our metrics.
Can't measure it, doesn't exist.
The next one on the list here is the Harbach Center Programming Operations, which we briefly talked about, and I'll cover again here with the next slide. The addition of a second ops specialist for that natural resource team and the promotion of an existing ops specialist. So that would come approximately about a year from now to finish out that team. The next two items are items that were identified in the council as part of your strategic planning process, but we did not include in this proposed budget. A couple different reasons. One, they would likely fall at the very end of this budget, and as well as we wanted to do a little bit more digging and give you a little bit more information and have a short discussion here about the two of them before we move forward potentially in budget allocation requests in future years. The first one was the community program registration software. So one of the things we did following strategic planning was reach out to several of the different companies to get a feel, what would it take to implement a new registration software here for our recreation programming, pool passes, all those type of things, and then what would it take beyond our current operating budget. So realizing that, you know, the software we have is probably one of the cheaper ones out there from an annual operating cost standpoint. So the one we looked at that we think would make the most sense if the council wanted to proceed forward with this is Civic Rec based, it's called. And that would be about a $45,000 one-time cost. That includes all the tech support to help migrate all of our program registration software accounts over. It would help us get it all planned and built in there with, you know, from the aquatic center to the shelters that we have, to the rooms that we rent, to the programs that we offer. And then we estimated it'd be approximately $20,000 over what we spend annually in operating costs for that. That comes from some of the data safety things that they offer. It comes from just some of the more expensive costs that they have to do that. So that was kind of the first topic. The second one is go ahead.
So from a percentage basis, is that, you know, that 20,000, is that, how significant of an increase is that, right?
Yeah, so I think right now it varies a little bit each year, but we're in the neighborhood of $11,000 to $15,000 in annual cost for the sportsmen that we currently use. And so it'd be more than double.
Okay. And it's solely just because basically the provider is just, that's what they charge, right? That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a better product. I mean,
We fully believe that if you went this way, it would be a better product. I think the question is how much better would it be, and do us as staff and you as the council believe that it would be worth that extra money? So that's why we didn't throw it as an actual budget item, because we wanted to kind of start that discussion.
And I agree 100%. It's going to be a better product, newer, more robust platform, et cetera. The question I have is, will that better product increase revenues to the city because it's more efficient? What's the return on investment is that? And is there an efficiency factor with staff as well?
So I think our answer is no, we don't believe that it would offset those costs. I mean, yes, would it be great? But there's always going to be challenges with every software that's out there. So do the challenges we have now, do we have different challenges? Probably. Does that make sense from that cost? I don't know if we believe that at this point.
I don't have kids in that age but from what I've heard, you know, from others and even on this council, that it's not a great experience on our enrollment, right? In that,
Very antiquated.
so maybe something between what we have and
Is there a next step where you're going
This
to come back
Cadillac.
and provide us more information on this, or is it just basically off the table?
No, we're not saying that. I mean, ultimately, the decision's up to the council if that's something you want to continue to pursue. We could certainly dive deeper into that with the potential manufacturers and try to get, do they see increases in registration, smoothness, time it takes, some of those things?
Were you planning on a next step beyond this at this point?
What I would say is, so this was identified as a low priority in your strategic planning voting. So what we would do is come back with more information ahead of your next strategic planning and see if it rises up your priority list. Part of the reason we also didn't include a couple of these things is what I'm going to share with you later in the presentation. And we had to start making some choices on some things to now that we have some more exposure to revenue loss. And so these were ones that we wanted to bring to you, knowing that they were on that low priority periphery. Again, part of the budget process and making those hard choices. And then as we'll talk about with the next one, is that was so much on the tail end of this next fiscal year that it makes sense to move forward with it at this time, but I'll let him explain that.
There's one more opportunity to be aware of. Cityofclive.com and the Library of Parks sites have a shelf life. All websites do. The preferred provider that Richard's identified is a city, sort of civic tech conglomerate. They do a lot of different things. I think they actually got their start doing rec, and so they're really good at it. But they were the number 2 rated provider when we were evaluating how we wanted to build the new website. Now, I don't want us to get in a habit of trying to keep ourselves beholden to the timelines of these different tech companies. We just talked about how that works with the body cams. But if there was a time to bring forward both this rec programming and put it alongside a civic hosted or civic built site, there could be some advantages for us to consider from a money standpoint and from a user experience.
Well, the other thing I've heard from families, is maybe the experience isn't great, but that our programs fill up, right? And so you can have the best system in the world, and if we don't have the room to put more people in, then the efficiencies and everything are for naught. We spend $20,000 to fill up even faster, or whatever it is. So I think there needs to be a balance on how to grow those programs and add, people, residents to be able to join those programs, and then increase some of this software. But
So I think that kind of transitions into the next one that Matt was talking about. This was the neighborhood programming expansion. So I outlined a little bit in the budget memo on kind of how we would look at that if we were moving forward with an expansion of neighborhood park programming. The way we looked at it is one that we'd almost call a mobile recreation program that could be taken across the city to offer park programming in every neighborhood park that we have throughout the spring, summer, and fall season. We estimate $40,000 in kind of annual costs for programming supplies, as well as the staffing it would take to get that done. And then approximately $50,000 to kind of startup costs. The way we've kind of looked at that is it would be for the purchase of the things that would go in that kind of mobile recreation vehicle, and then the purchase of a vehicle for that, to do that. Like Matt said, the way we kind of outlined it is it would be something that wouldn't start till like the end of the fiscal 24 year, which could potentially, if the council wanted to move forward with something like this, would be something that we could go out, ask for maybe donations, sponsorships to help offset some of those startup costs, but wanted to just kind of put it in front of you on what we thought the maximum impact to the city would be from a fiscal standpoint.
What I'll add to this one too is this was a high priority on the management agenda list. What also factors in here is capacity, a load with what his team has on their plate right now, with now us likely moving forward with Greenbelt Landing, with some things that we'll have coming before you, Circasina Park, Lannan Park, and everything that we want to do there. This was also a load management choice as well, especially with it being on the tail end of the fiscal year. We knew it was a high priority item. That's why we wanted to bring it up. But we just felt like, again, that was another choice we wanted to bring before you.
so the more I've been thinking about the Harbeck Center over the last months and stuff, and now seeing the numbers, I mean, I'm not saying I'm set on this, but it makes me wonder even more, is a $50,000 investment in something like this a better investment than a $160,000 investment at Harbach on an annual basis with 63,000 going, out the windows in heat and air condition? Do you do a better job in recreation and providing with some mobile van of a library slash programming into different areas, right? So anyways, I think it's food for thought for us in the future, especially as you redo Lenan and make it really a destination place. It already is by default, but now you just need to infuse a little bit of programming, maybe not an entire building.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a conversation we'd have in strategic planning, but
Right.
I mean, I think that's where a big population is that's been so underserved, as you know. And so to me, that investment is more than worthwhile. The idea that we need a mobile, program to go out to, the western parks, I'd rather invest that money into Harbach personally, so.
No, and I think there's a lot of options there too, as we talked about a little bit with the school district when Dr. Adams was here last time of, you have a building there. Is there a mobile aspect that the city can invest in where we can easily move things around? But as long as we have a facility to go to that we can stand things up in, that's available. Now, granted, the one thing that doesn't solve is the schools are busy in the wintertime. The wintertime is harder to do mobile things outside. That's one advantage of the Harbach Center. I mean, there's a lot you could go into that, but I think it speaks to the need of why we need to do that analysis on long-term. We know Lenan, we got to invest there, and that's part of this RFP that's going out of, we're going to do the design, we're going to work on Lenan, but we also need to answer some of these tough questions related to Harbach going forward.
Well, Ted, I agree with you on the investment in that part of the community. My question about the numbers being served is just to help us identify if we're finding what it is that the residents want.
Yeah.
We might think it's one thing, but it takes some evaluation over time.
One thing I would say about mobile versus kind of a static place, one thing that we have found is really, really valuable for the programming that we provide is that physical space that the fire bay provides for us, as well as the community room. Those have been just great resources for us to have as we've offering programming, not just for that neighborhood, but just as a whole. That's been a huge addition to our programming kind of space to be able to do that. Kind of the next slide starts to jump into some of the metrics or some of the data. We'll continue to evolve that based on some of the discussion we're hearing tonight. But top right is some of the circulation we're seeing. So I think it's been hard to catch on to get adults into the library to help check out books with kids, but that has continued to grow. It still varies each month based on the weather, school, activities, you name it. But you can see that the next one with our programming attendance, when we have specific events out there, we're getting huge attendance with some of those. And just generally on a daily basis, we're seeing at least 50 people go through there on any given day that we are open. We take that from the door counts that we have. We have door count monitors on there. Obviously, you might get a little bit of duplication here and there, but those are pretty close to what we think is unique based on what we're seeing, number of people come through there. Some of the key takeaways, like I said, the library visits are steady. We're starting to see some of the material checkouts grow. Computers are hugely popular over there. Kids come to the library for the computers to use as either playing video games or surfing the internet. The drop-in recreation where we just have staff out there and we have pickleball, basketball, whatever you want in the bay. That was slow at first. We were only getting a couple people through the spring and summer. But as we've gotten into school now, that's becoming more and more popular. We get on average about 18 to 20 kids that'll come out there and hang out during those hours that we're open. And one of the things we're really finding is special events are incredibly popular. 3 things that we've done so far. Play at the Bay, so that's something that we have opened up. It just takes a lot of different games and activities for young kids to come out. We're getting anywhere from 50 to 80 people that come out to that every time we have it. A Heyday at Harbach's geared at kids a little bit older, kind of school-age kids. We're getting 35 to 50 kids come out when we have that. Bounce houses, we get probably over 100 kids every time we do that just to come out. So those specific activities where we're creating something for them to come to have been incredibly popular. And one of the things we'll see at the February 23rd meeting is actually we're taking some grant funds to help supplement and purchase additional things for like the Play at the Bay program that we're doing out there. So we're seeing a lot of really good things that are starting to happen as we get to know the neighborhood more. We've been working closely with Crestview to get flyers. The staff creates a monthly flyer of all the programming. Crestview has been amazing. The principal, as long as we print them out, she'll physically put them in all of the kids' backpacks, which is something that the school district doesn't normally do there. So we're able to get into all those homes within the kids that go to that neighborhood. Same with Clive Elementary that also serves this neighborhood. They've been good to work with as well. So I think we're continuing to build momentum here. Getting more people to know and trust this. We've got a lot of good kids that come out on a regular basis. Something the West Des Moines Schools is also going to be starting. They're going to use the old fire admin area on Wednesday afternoons for kind of a homework program. So they're just waiting until they can find someone for that position that will help with that. But we expect to see even more kids here probably in the next month or so on Wednesdays when we're open as well. So we feel like there's a lot of momentum on a lot of these things, but certainly we're learning all the time and adjusting and changing.
The Fiesta Latina events have been very popular. as
Yes.
well, Richard, so those have been very well attended. How about the mini pitch courts? What's your usage look like on those?
We haven't tracked specific, but every time we're out there, now obviously not as much in the cold and snow and stuff like that, but basically from when school gets out and all summer long, it's constant until lights go off at night. So they shut off at 10 o'clock when the park hours are, and there's kids there nonstop. And I know Michael's seen
If
those
it's
quite a bit.
mild and even this winter and there's no snow on those, they're out there. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, the use has been phenomenal on that. It's been a great investment in that neighborhood.
May I? Got something to add about the Harbach use?
You need to come to the mic, please, Stephanie. Tell us who you are.
I'm Stephanie Horrock from Clive Community Services, and I just wanted to say that we have programming at Harbach also. English, it's not really English lessons so much as community kind of lessons where we're speaking English and learning about life skills, things like maybe what do we do when we go to the bank, what do we do when we go to the doctor, what do we do when we go to school and talk to our teachers and conferences and all that kind of stuff. But we do have proper, we think very soon, proper ESL lessons starting soon in that space. So this is big programming for Clive Community Services and the library staff and West Des Moines Schools. We're all jointly going together to do that. So that space is, it's going to be used big time for that. So thank you.
Stephanie, do you know much about across the street there in a small building, there's a barber. But inside there's also English as a second language courses, and they build themselves, and the sign is a community room, community facility for more the Latino. I've been in there, I've talked to them a couple times, but do you know much about them or partnering with them? Because they're trying to do those as well.
So I don't know much about it, but we did talk about it in our last meeting with the library staff. They've been over to talk to them. And the West Des Moines Community School lady, she mentioned that she knows about it too. And I think Lisa knows a little bit about it. I don't think they're traditional English lessons like what you're talking about. I think it's more like a resource kind of what you probably know more about it.
Yeah, I think you're pretty accurate on that.
Well, it sounds kind of like what you're doing, right? Not an official English language course is kind of what you described you're doing.
I don't know. I should probably go talk to
educate.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know Lisa knows more about it, and I know your staff knows about it. The program that we're doing right now, Karen Kelly she's our education chair. She used to be a member or an employee of the West Des Moines School District, and she ran kind of a family, kind of an English kind of a program. So the people that are attending her current class right now are largely Burmese. It's a largely Burmese group, and they are largely people that she has built up relationships with in the past and has maintained that. And they like to get together and they all talk and visit and do whatever lesson she's got planned for the day on life skill kind of stuff. She is not, with this particular class that she's having right now, she's not really meeting the needs, I think, of people who are new and have absolutely no English skills. And we're seeing a lot of Hispanics now. So a couple years ago it was the Burmese, and now we're seeing an influx of Hispanics. So I think that once we get this other program set up, well, I know the plan is at the food pantry, we are going to be pushing that out. We're going to have flyers and say, okay, here's these, these classes. We need you to go to these classes. You can take your kids. You can, blah, blah, blah. So we're working on that right now. And yeah, Richard can probably talk about that more. But I just wanted to say it's really been a valuable space, and we thank you for it.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I think that goes to more of our discussion we had with the school superintendent, right? We can't do this by ourselves, either financially or in manpower. And so the schools and others have to step up and make this truly a combined process at both Harbach and other facilities, right? That it serves everybody, but duplicating and triplicating the services and facilities isn't wise either, so.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's a new word. Look it up. Weaver.
Like 3P.
It's a word. That's right. I am gonna look it up. I think it's a word.
Doug, could you please proceed?
Weaver.
Happily. This will actually be my 26th budget, just saying. And my goal, just like the 25 previous ones, to be the shortest conversation.
Make the mayor happy.
We continue to provide a very similar range of services within the department. As you can see, our staff positions are the same as we have had in the past few years. The projects and the types of activities that we're involved in continue to be relatively similar year over year, whether or not it's new development or working on planning activities more specific to a portion of the community. Those are all very consistent. The budget itself, in terms of the operating expenses, are principally the same as they have been in the past. The one modification or request this year is continuation of the planning activities in the District 1 or 86th Street neighborhood areas. We have submitted for a mobility grant for $200,000. It does require a 20% local match, which would be the $40,000 that's being requested in the budget as the match if that grant is received. We would suggest that once we have knowledge of the success of that grant, which will not likely happen until September sometime. If we don't have success with the grant, then we'll have to have a conversation about whether or not we want to take advantage of getting engaged into that next planning activity with the money that we have available. It may mean that we have to do it kind of in a piecemeal fashion, but it does provide us an opportunity to stay engaged in the mobility piece of the District 1 planning area. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hearing no questions, Doug, thank you very much.
You're a rock star, Doug.
Keeping the record, apparently. I'm going to have Dennis Harkin come up and talk a little bit about the tech services side of the house in the city manager's office, and then I'll talk a little bit about the position request.
Good evening, council. Just want to kind of highlight a few things based on this slide and some things you'll see in the tech services memo. As you know, recovery of our systems and cybersecurity take a high priority for us in the city. This past calendar year, we continued our cloud backup to improve on our recovery goals, and we are also making improvements always on the city firewalls and maintaining regular updates and patches on our infrastructure. We also implemented, as you know, a multi-factor authentication process for our users as well as our IT consultants over the past 12 months. Wasn't that all fun? The new data center is one of the most fantastic assets that the city has ever built. We are continuing to consolidate other technology resources into this new data center for other remaining interfacility connections as well as connections to Westcom. We're also making some plans to move our traffic communication systems and that whole infrastructure into that building. So we're in the planning processes of that right now. We continue to balance out our spending for infrastructure and computer replacement needs in the capital equipment. This upcoming year, we have a little more spending on computer replacements because, once again, we're doing 2 departments this year instead of just 1 as we did last year. We will again be able to catch up on some other much-needed upgrades in other areas of the city's tech infrastructure. Some of our operational budgets are seeing upticks in maintenance costs. Part of that was adding the redundant internet connection, which has been very valuable. And a few maintenance contracts are seeing really big bumps in the renewal cost. Overall, our maintenance costs have gone down for the upcoming year due to some items dropping off support, and some of the maintenance items that are regularly paid for are not due next year, but then will be in the budget for the following year. And that's about all I got.
Questions for Dennis? Eric?
Dennis, so are you comfortable with the money that's in the budget for cybersecurity? And what do you see as far as needs for that moving forward?
I think we're sitting in a really good place right now. We've got some very good products in place that we just pay annually. We get alerts from those. We look into those. We're making improvements in the firewall technologies as well. So yeah, I think our budget's looking pretty good on that. As we've discussed in some other departments, is the tech vendors will, they'll end the life of product, say, okay, you have to upgrade to this product, whatever. So we'll have to continue to deal with those in the future and the price increases that go with that.
Thank you.
Any potential for any process improvements you see coming down, kind of, in the short term or kind of midterm based on some of the consolidation efforts that you just talked about and just generally with some of the cybersecurity postures that we're changing?
Well, I think one of those process improvements we're going to be doing is, as Pete mentioned, with the parks and the Lucity project. That's going to be a huge tech advantage for the entire Parks Department. I don't know outside of that, seeing any real big
Anything from like the
efficiencies.
firewall or cybersecurity side? Because, I know you were talking about some of the technologies we've switched to more recently being, giving us greater insight and doing those reportings and things like that. Does that give us an opportunity to do some process improvements to further automate some of those things, or do those all come with dollar tags basically because of?
Some of those do, yes. And there's lots of paid services that we could have also monitoring our systems. Some of the vendors we use do that already, but there's always somebody who will.
I'd validate what Dennis said too. In the time that he and I have been here together, roughly the same time, 5 years here in April for the two of us, I think we can confidently say that the number of systems we're supporting has only gone up.
Right.
And that we're doing it with 2 people largely still, and then a team of consultants and to be in a good stable spot right now is a real credit to Dennis and to James and the work that they're doing. The trend, if we're going to stay lean like this, will be to increasingly work with those consultant teams and put a big weight on the shoulders of this team to keep managing more and more systems. Just to use police as an example, the technologies that they're looking at using now just every year keep improving, and it's to do important stuff. It's public safety. And IT is, anytime we're implementing one of those, it's got to walk lockstep with the PD to understand what we're actually getting into, and then making sure they've got a tool they can use.
And that's kind of the concern as we get more and more technology everywhere, right? Before you know it, the radios need their own servers too, right? Or whatever the next trend is.
Well, and we've made some, like Pete said, 5 years, we've made a lot of improvements on the whole infrastructure. When I got here, we had all physical servers for the most part, and that's all been virtualized now. And being monitored. So,
Two more areas for improvement that Dennis could talk more to would be the work we're doing on the access controls across all the different facilities, which has an IT component. Some of that's been, and then also
Yes.
some of the recent changes we've made with cameras
right.
as well. Have been some
Because
consolidations.
we've had the desire, and we've done some studies on this over the last couple of years, just on the security of the facilities. So we have projects coming up just to improve on the security and trying to consolidate those systems into the new system that we have at public safety, so that we can kind of get rid of some of the older systems that,
Yeah, because right now we're running two access control systems. The one that controls this building, Public Works, and then CPSC, we put a brand new system in that's more state-of-the-art, top of the line with a Vigilon. And our goal is to migrate everything to a Vigilon. Now, granted, we gotta be mindful of the storage capacity and everything like that, and the licensing expenses that go along with those cameras, but those cameras in the access control system that's tied into it is much better than the system that we have today, and it's a much more stable system. And so there's gonna be some actions we're gonna be taking over the next few months to get these buildings up to speed on those systems. Parks Maintenance Building doesn't have anything, it's just key-based there. And so that's one we definitely wanna just get up to the same standard as the other buildings. And then this building, especially on the external camera side, where even if we do remodeling to this building in the future, we'll still be able to maintain those systems. We would put them in those spots anyway. We'll be doing some upgrades, proposing to use some upgrades that will get us to a point where we're in a much more secure state in this building. Ultimately, it's gonna take that full renovation to get the interior posture of this building in a secure space, even in the space that we're standing in right now. But we wanna at least start getting part of the way there with the camera systems.
I'm going to mention also, related to cameras, we just finished up a migration of the traffic cameras at the intersections from one system that the vendor wanted like $45,000 for us to replace with their hardware, software, et cetera. We were able to migrate all that to the Vigilon camera system for, I think, maybe $10,000, a little less.
And we didn't have to have another system to take care of.
Right. And we had enough storage in the current camera system at public safety to,
Sounds like a process improvement to me.
there's a process improvement right there. So, thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
And then the last position request, and this is one I know we talked about in December, is the communication specialist position. Again, there was a kind of a detailed memo that we outlined to you all in terms of where we see the responsibilities going and shifting between positions, and so showing it to you now financially in this budgeted process. So with that, now we dive into all of the specifics about the general fund. Want to check in? We're almost at the 2-hour mark. Did you want to do a quick recess before we get into kind of the big decision points?
I was thinking there might be a need. Is there a need? There's a need. We'll be in recess for 5 minutes.
All right. here he comes.
Don't mind us, Matthew. It's fine.
There was a line.
I'll let him switch it over. Yep. I'll need the screen back.
McCoy must have triplicated himself.
I was in the process.
Give me
of
the screen, Matthew.
I was in the process of triplicating.
Yeah.
Good to know.
There we go. All right. So now we'll dive in to the proposed budget and some of the big stats. So significant revenue increases, you see them there on the screen. I will say number one has a caveat to it that you'll see here in a few slides. Initially, when we were presented the rollback figure last October, that rollback number was changing substantially, over 2 percentage points, as you see on the screen there. So with residential being about 70-ish% of our taxable valuation, it definitely has an impact on our property tax valuation growth. And so you see that on the screen. That will get about halved in what I'm about to show you in about 4 slides. On the recreation and aquatic side, again, we're doing very well in that area. That is coming back full throttle. We're wanting to reflect that for full seasons now. Now coming out of COVID half seasons, things like that. It comes along with, some of those revenues do come along with some fee changes at the aquatics facility. Again, keeping pace with our growing staff costs, seasonal staff costs. So that is also baked into that revenue number. One of the items that I wanted to talk about tonight might be kind of hard to see on the screen because I didn't realize that would block that. Just recent information that we received, again, stepping back a little bit. So a little bit of history, you're probably wondering why are we showing 8 years on the history screen there. So cycling back, Clive historically had managed its own solid waste contract directly with, it was originally artistic and it changed to waste management. And we had a very good deal for a long time with that contract. We knew when that contract was running out, we were going to have a substantial bump in our solid waste costs, most particularly. And at that time, the city made a decision to move over to what most all the other cities were doing under the Metro Waste Authority, is having Metro Waste Authority manage those contracts and negotiate on our behalf as a collective. And so we made that transition, and that is the FY 22-23, so the current fiscal year that we're in. It was the initiation of a first 5-year agreement, 5 or 7 year.
Is there any way to get rid of that black
7 year.
box down there? We can't see the numbers for.
Matthew and I have been working on that throughout the meeting. We haven't been able to get
Here,
that.
I will fix it for you.
Oh. Next time, just ask Matt.
I don't know if you'll be able to get there, Matt. That,
I will just do this. There you go.
There we go.
You might not be able to see the text, but you can see the table
Think
now.
outside the box.
Just make a quick change. So again, I think that history is important, and I'll tell you why. You'll notice that. So we had that transition point, 22-23, the start of the 7-year contract. And I can tell you, and we had that discussion at this time, yes, it was a jump, but it was a jump that would have been a lot higher if we weren't a part of a collective group versus being on our own. And our neighbor to the west has seen that, City of Waukee. Their numbers are much higher than these numbers that you see because they're not part of that collective. They're not part of the Metro Waste Authority group. And so with that, though, what happens with those contracts is Metro Waste Authority has clauses in there. So obviously you've heard about the inflationary expenses. We've talked about it ourselves with our equipment, staffing, fuel costs. Well, that's going to also bake out for a hauler as well. So they have caps in those agreements of 4%. Well, they hit the cap. It would have been higher than 4% in the numbers that you're seeing for 23, 24 for that hauler line if we did not have that cap, or Metro Waste hadn't put that cap in that 7-year agreement. So we're up against the cap. So that's the increase that you see. So we'll get a letter every year from Metro Waste Authority for where both the Curbit number and the hauler number is going. Historically, again, why I'm showing you the 8-year history is when we were managing the contract under our own control, we tried to, at least from a staff perspective, and then council adopted this, we tried to do a rate increase for these because we, put these on the water bills and we're collecting them, and then we either paying it to the hauler at Waste Management at the time, and now Metro Waste Authority managing the contracts. So we didn't have to change the rate every year. Well, that doesn't exactly work out now because we now have, because of the large jump that we took last year, we used to charge an administrative fee for the cost of us doing the billing on the utility bill to cover our staff costs for doing the billing. It also, that administrative fee also allowed us to have that float to try to lock in that rate for a little bit longer and not have to change it every year. Well, now we're in a different scenario. We've zeroed out the administrative fee. We absorbed that as a city, so now we're covering that cost baked into our other billing costs for water and sanitary sewer and stormwater. And all we're doing now is paying basically 100% pass-through of the costs. So every year we'll get a letter from Metro Waste Authority that will tell us here's where the hauler rate is going, here's where the curbit rate is going based on the contract language. So the question for the council, and the reason I showed this table the way I did, is I'm recommending that we treat this just like we do the other three utilities, if you're making a little adjustment every year versus trying to make a bigger adjustment, anticipating it's going to be harder for us to predict where that rate's going to go, where you don't have to change it every year. We had that administrative fee in the past to help us with that. We don't have that anymore. So what I'm saying to you is, what I'm proposing to you is just treat it as 100% pass through, kind of in a way how we treat the WRA and the Des Moines Water Works expenses in our utilities, although we have our own other expenses, and make that slight adjustment to the solid waste rate that we charge every year versus trying to have one change that lasts for 3 or 4 years, because that's going to be a lot harder to predict than it was in the past. So this was something that came to us new here in the last couple of weeks after we had kind of put together the big budget projections. And so because of that policy question, I did want to bring it up tonight because we haven't made the adjustments in the budget yet for, depending on your direction tonight on these rates, how you want to handle it. If you want to handle it as 100% pass through as I've proposed, we will adjust the budget accordingly. So the expense and the revenue side basically match. Essentially, it's a pass through, and we would make that adjustment when we get further down the line for your budget adoption.
Any objections? Hearing none, you're good, go.
Okay. So now moving on, some significant decreases in revenue. Commercial property tax backfill. So again, hits keep on coming related to property tax. So we're in the middle of the backfill reduction that was implemented 2 sessions ago to start this last year. 7-year phase out for us. So that continues with another $50,000 loss and that phase out for this proposed budget year. Also, and this is one I wanted to notice, or make you aware of because it's a pretty big change when you look at the cash flow document, is we are now in this current fiscal year in our last year of the buyout payments that West Des Moines has been paying us for our ownership stake of Station 22. That then allows us to transition that relationship to a contract for services only, and that's why we're in the negotiations we're in, because that 2080 agreement runs out June 30th of this year. So they had one more payment to make, so now they bought out our roughly $1.3 million stake that we had, because when we built that station, we built it together, we owned it together, and now they've bought out our ownership stake, so then they will be the sole owners of that station. So then that gives them the flexibility if they ever want to move it someday, which they don't, they've kind of backed off of that in the short term anyway, is what they've shared with us at this point. But now it's clear on who's the owner of that building. So that's a decrease that I wanted to note. Overall, a decent revenue increase for the year. Did want to note that we have had some growth in the Dallas County revenues, lost revenues, and so that's also reflected in here. And the key with that one is the property tax relief portion of the Dallas County lost revenues go into the general fund to offset our costs related to Station 43. So the city would have had to likely increase the tax rate to support that financially when we did it. It's covering roughly 75% of those expenses. So that's a huge benefit to our residents on the property tax side. So now transitioning to expenditures. So the personnel expenses are a little harder to track this year in terms of the change from one year to the next. And that is mainly because this current fiscal year, we have an extra payroll. Every 7 to 8 years, we hit that where we hit that 27th payroll. So we have that this year, so it's a little harder to see the transition because it's not accurate. It'll look different because the current year will be abnormally high. So one thing I wanted to mention on this, so we have the collective bargaining agreements, which we have 2 more years on those agreements. Those are 3-year agreements, which this is the first year of the current fiscal year that we're in. We're also showing on the non-union side an overall 6% with 4% CPI and 2% merit. So Personnel Committee and I have had a conversation about this the last couple months, talking about with where inflation was at, continues to be in, especially in November as a benchmark month that we look at, well over 6%, almost 7%. Similar to last year, the council authorized to, instead of using the 3% cap on CPI, is using that extra percentage point. So for budgeting purposes, they were supportive of at least putting that in here and showing it as a 4% CPI with the 2% merit. Now, the caveat to all of this is we've put these in as placeholders because what you're going to be seeing over the next month or so is a series or a package of presentations related to a number of the recruitment, retention, market analysis work that we've been doing with the consultant. We've had some conversations with the Personnel Committee about this, working on a new performance evaluation system that ties to the pay matrix. So we want to bring that all back to you in kind of an overall package to show it to you. But at this point in time, we basically have, again, a placeholder in the budget to reflect that. But we've got a lot more details to share with you on that we're working on right now. We just weren't ready for it all tonight. But that's going to be coming here hopefully in the month of March. I need to circle back with the Personnel Committee on a number of these things before we bring it back to the full council. One thing I also wanted to mention on hotel motel expenses, stable this year. One increase request that we did have was Clive Community Services, as Stephanie and Dennis are here, representing those folks from an increase from $8,000 to $10,000. And big reason behind that is their rent expense that they're looking at. If you recall too, we also have matching dollars where Polk County and the Clive Community Foundation and us kind of all match together to help cover their rent. So we're trying, they've requested a little bit more in funding this year to reflect those increased costs. And if I'm correct, Polk County has approved their support match to match that. So that's one thing I wanted to point out to the council, something different this year. Then the collaborative public safety programs. So what you see here in terms of changes in expenditures is a substantial reduction in the West Side Station, as we talked about before. And so that is kind of our showing that, and that's a huge benefit to our budget this year, is showing that reduction, anticipating that $300,000 in savings. And so we are trying to, that's really helping us out on the overall budget proposal that's before you. So again, when you see the overall expenditure being an actual decrease from one year to the next, that's really a reflection of that budget, of the salary item that I mentioned, the personnel expenses, because we have that extra payroll in this current year. Again, wages payroll is 70 to 80% of our budget, our operating budget in the general fund. So that is why it looks a little wonky from the current fiscal year to the budget year. Again, when you look at the long-term trend over 7-8 years, it averages out, and we've got some of the averages in the memo that reflect that.
What would you say the increase would be if you leveled out those pay periods?
It probably, on one pay period, it's probably about $350,000-ish. So you'd be looking at $600,000 to $700,000 from one year to the next is about an average year. I'm trying to think the percentage off the top of my head. I can't.
Because that's the better number to use, right? Than
That's more the accurate number. So just add a new payroll in there.
just Doug and Denny and John have been here that long to see that happen.
Hey, Matt, that
The chief said.
West Side $300,000 savings, that's a one-time savings, is that
Nope,
right?
every year.
It's annual. For
Annual.
how long? For the length of the 28?
So what we're proposing in the negotiations is to turn that 2080 agreement into what I call an evergreen. So it's basically doesn't have an end clause. It has an 18-month out. Similar to what we do with a lot of other 2080s, especially our regional 2080s, where you have to give notice by the end of December, and then it triggers an 18-month clock. So then it gives you a fiscal year to plan for any changes. And so then we won't have to go back and renegotiate it, because what we kind of feel is this contract for service will be the stable, kind of, now we're stabilizing it out after the ownership change and everything. So we would essentially turn it into an evergreen 2080. Each community would have their out, but they'd have to give an 18-month notice essentially.
Right, that's just the difference between the proposed contract for service and actually having an ownership stake in the West Side Station then.
Actually, no, it's more that what the chief talked about is that reduction of call area. So we pay based on our calls.
Gotcha.
So if you're reducing that space down and kind of eliminating those huge overlaps that we have today and reducing it to the 142nd and Interstate, you know, based on our modeling of past calls, when the chief said it reduces it about in half, it doesn't work out quite half on the financial side because there's fixed costs baked in, and that's part of what we're negotiating right now is what overhead costs are they going to be allowed to put in there versus strictly based on the service calls. It's still that if I had to predict to you today where West Des Moines is probably standing right now is they still want to have a service call element in the formula. I wanted to try to maybe go a little away from that. You know, it's a negotiation.
But in that same token, we'd probably want that. I mean, I always keep bringing it back to Windsor Heights, but eventually I think there will be something there, right? And I think we'd want a per call at some point, right? So I mean, I'm saying I think it's a fair request.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to do it. So like for Urbandale, that is a population-based model. But that was a conscious decision by both communities that this station was covering our Dallas County populations.
Right.
Hence why we were putting 142nd as the line for Station 22, because we're already paying for the Dallas County residents to the west of that street in Station 43. So that's a population base, but that made sense for that model. It's very residential, very minimal commercial. Where everything east of there is you have more stations in the mix too. So then it makes a little bit more sense to do it on a call basis. And I would agree with you if there's opportunity down the line where our neighboring community to the east is looking at a model. I would say you could either go service calls or you could go per capita expenses. Because I would argue you wouldn't want our residents to subsidize another communities. It's easy to do that when you each of you only have one station,
Right.
where West Des Moines has 5. So it's a little bit 5, right? 5 or 4? Oh, 5, thank you.
Make sure not to put Neb McCoy on the negotiating team when we're negotiating.
Triplicate our cost.
So when you look at the general fund position, again, big asterisk that we're going to talk about here in a minute. Cash position, we were projecting last year a use of cash reserves a little bit higher than what's shown in this proposed budget. Again, if you're looking at, we had an anomaly year this last fiscal year that closed out where those payments didn't time right, where we were only 90% of our budgeted expenditures, and hence why we had the large surplus at the end of the year. But even if you took a conservative 98% assumption, again, we never spend 100% of our budget, this would essentially be a surplus budget, adding to cash reserves at the end of the fiscal year. Over the past years, I thought this was kind of curious to show is where our revenues have averaged and where our expenses have averaged, about a half-point difference. I'm concerned going forward if that trend widens between those two numbers, because the reality is something's got to give at some point. Now, we're very fortunate as a community with a high level of cash reserves from a really good previous fiscal year, and now we're starting to see interest income. I didn't mention that on the revenue side. Our interest income revenue is very much coming back, and that's a huge benefit for us. But even with this, we were projecting maybe a hair under 30%. Again, our target is 25, our floor is 20, our ceiling is roughly around 30. With the uncertainty that we have coming at us with the legislature, I would argue that how we use our cash reserve is going to be really important in the next year or two. So even with this, we're anticipating, again, that's 36.2%. If we did spend 100% of our budget, if it was 98%, it'd be even higher than that. And to give you kind of a history, again, where we budgeted, so you have the little parentheses, that was a use of cash reserves budgeted, revised. Again, we've had some swings in the revised because we had 3 years there where we did a flood-prone property buyout transfer when we exceeded our cash reserve amount, we transferred when we were in the revised part of the year, after the budget was adopted, where we transferred a substantial amount of funds to help fund our flood-prone property buyout program in 3 different phases. So that's why you see those 3 bigger revised numbers. But even then, look at the actual. We've been adding to cash reserves. Now, that trend isn't going to stay that way forever, but what that is put us in a really good position to manage what's coming at us. And what's coming at us is state legislature changes, current and proposed. So here is just a summary slide. Again, we've shown this in past years of where we're at in terms of the commercial property tax rollback, reducing that revenue from the state being reduced to us. And you can kind of see the impacts to each of the funds. We've got that in the long-term projections that you see in this fund summary. Those are all baked into that for all the funds. One thing to note here, the 2% transparency threshold. Again, what you'll be asked to do following this presentation is set the public hearing for the max property tax levy. That action is required as a part of this piece of legislation that was passed in 2019. Anytime we go above a 2% property tax growth threshold, it requires an additional hearing. That additional hearing then is required to be approved, resolution be approved, and it requires a 4/5 vote of the council to do so. As a growing community like Clive is, even as I talked about earlier, we saw roughly 5.8% taxable valuation growth. Even with Senate File 181, which is the next slide, we would still be above that 2% threshold. We're about 3.3%. So what I'm advising is that we continue our practice of recognizing we're a growing community and that we'll be continuing to exceed this transparency threshold for years to come. So Senate File 181, there is a House study bill number that I can't remember now that just got introduced today that has a subcommittee on Monday. So this passed the Senate as of yesterday. I'm sure some of you have read about it. I know the mayor has been sharing some of those articles. Long story short, it's going to move our residential rollback figure from 56.49 to 54.65. So that means just a slight increase in the residential rollback from the current year that we're sitting in to this budget year. What that means for the 2 funds that we're talking about tonight, and the impact to debt service is about the same as the impact to trust and agency, is general fund takes a hit of about $300,000. So that revenue number that I showed you before of about 731 would be 431 in terms of new property tax revenue growth. And then you see the impact to the fund balance percentage that I'm showing, that I showed you in this, that's showing in this. You'd have another 300,000 on top of it. Again, this is pending legislation. Everything that we're hearing is that the House is going to likely take this up fairly quickly. The governor's going to sign it. If that happens, then the Department of Revenue has 2 days to issue a new rollback order. And then the county assessors have 15 days, and with the auditors, 15 days to issue new property tax taxable valuation for all of the local government entities in their county. And as the way the bill it was approved on the Senate side, they are extending our budget approval deadline from March 31st to April 30th by a month. The reason that they're doing that is they know you've got new valuations that they need to get published, and for us to develop our budget publication, so the last public hearing that you do to then approve the budget, that budget publication would not have accurate valuation numbers in it. Now, what we've been told from the Iowa Department of Management, as long as we're not exceeding that number, you could still proceed forward. That's why they've advised us you can continue with your max levy process as long as you're not anticipating changing your tax levy rate and going above that. You're fine to continue with your max levy. And what we would advise is by the time we get to the February 23rd meeting, when you have your max levy public hearing and consideration, typically right after that, we would have you set the public hearing for the budget adoption, which would be that second meeting in March. Depending on if this legislation is moving, we may say, let's pause on that and wait to set the budget public hearing and have that action in early March. So then we can have an accurate budget publication in the paper. And then your budget consideration public hearing meeting would actually be the first one in April. I know that's a lot, a lot of moving pieces, and we're just figuring it out literally in the last couple of days. But the headline that I would say to you, and you're going to see this in my recommendation, I'm proposing to this council to not change anything. I know that's bold, but what I would argue to you is that what's laid out in this budget are strategic top and high priorities that you have laid out for us. They're included in this budget. This community, this council has very good cash reserves in both your general fund and your trust and agency fund and your debt service fund to manage this. We also know that there's probably more property tax legislation coming, whether it's this session or the next session, probably this session. And we don't know what that looks like. So what I'm advising is continue forward. We would revise the budget to that revised fund balance of use of cash reserves. Again, I go back to this slide of remembering we have time to make adjustments in the revised year until we actually close the books on the budget. So you have time. Don't let the state of Iowa dictate your strategic priorities. I know that's probably a bold statement to make.
Matt, with those revised fund balances, what would that put our cash reserves at as a percentage?
It would put it, I think I did the math on that, hold on. I think it still keeps it above 30%. Yeah, it still keeps it above 30%. It just depends on, the one thing we haven't done is as you adjust that revenue side, what your percent of expenditures and transfers out would be. But I can, safe to say you'd still be above around that ceiling number of 30%. At least, it'd probably, and by the time you close the book on the budget, so if you take that 98%, you'd be maybe a 150,000 use of cash reserves versus 629. Again, using the conservative 98% of expenditures. So that would be, you'd still be mid to upper 30s in terms of your cash reserve.
So assuming that, Matt, if we're at the 98% and we're in the mid-30s for cash reserves, our ceiling, in theory, should be 30. What are we proposing for that additional reserves? Because you can have too much reserves, in my opinion.
Yep, you can. What I'm proposing to you in that is wait and see, because I don't know what else is coming in terms of property tax reform that may reduce our future revenues. I think with.
For how long?
For how long? I would say I would see what happens with these next two legislative sessions. I would say a year from now, I would think we would know a lot more. And if we're still north of 30, then I think we have a conversation of what you'd want to do with those excess reserves. In the past, we used that for the flood-prone property buyout program. I'm being conservative of, I don't know what's going to happen on the revenue side, and my direction has been keep it at 1014 for as long as we can. We can use some cash reserves to allow us to make changes incrementally. So as we dip below 30%, we're structurally adjusting things to stabilize it and not racing below 30%, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But rest assured, the legislators are doing what's best for us.
Clearly.
They know what's best for
Understand
us.
local government.
Yes.
Very well, yeah.
Councilmember Jenkins, I know I thought you were going to say something on it. I was responding to
did
Ted.
say it isn't just property tax. We don't really know what's going to happen with sales tax either.
That's right.
Because that is very much a part of what the Senate wants to take over to justify saying that they did I will. And while on the one hand, they're saying they would keep cities whole, I don't believe that. So I would be saying both.
Yep.
One thing that bothers me about the presentation is the assumption that since we have had our levy set at $10.14, that the growth automatically generates a certain amount of growth. I don't think we should be saying that every year. I think we should be talking about what the levy needs to be to generate what we need. So I think it would be better if we wanted to keep that levy at $10.14, to say it would have been 10, 12, or whatever we were going to drop it to, but for the fact we're having to absorb these additional costs being imposed on us by changes that the legislature is about to impose. So it would be nice to know what that number would be if we weren't trying to make up for the way they're changing apartment valuations.
So essentially, if we didn't, if we still had that 300,000 in revenue and dropped our levy by that amount, you want to know what that levy would have been?
Yes, because I don't think it's a good idea to come and say, because of valuation growth and because our levy was at $10.14 before, this is what we get. It isn't how it works. We set the levy each year to generate what it is that we need for the budget. So it's a matter of how we speak about it, but that's what legislators don't like. They think it goes on automatic pilot, that whatever the valuation growth is, we just capture it every year and try to claim that we have held costs down, and it's not necessarily true. It's still increasing by a percentage. It isn't like that automatically comes to us. It's our decision.
A hell of a story to tell, though, right? I mean, I see what you're saying, but it's a tough one to
It is.
tell,
It
right,
is why legislators
right,
are coming in and
Yeah.
trying to put more caps on.
Right.
Because, so I think we need to demonstrate that we thought about what the levy needs to be, because we are going to see some of our other metro areas proud of making a little reduction.
Maybe. I mean, I understand where you're headed, and I like that. But the thing I've been hearing is the last look at it was they were going to give 15 days. So it's nice that they're going to give 30 days, you know. But many cities, at a meeting I was in, regional meeting, were talking about they're going to have to react to raise, right after that, on that 15-day or 30-day notice. So it will be interesting to see where some of these cities.
Yeah, Susan's right, though. There are,
Yeah.
I've talked to a couple different cities,
Want to.
council members that they were planning on a drop, but they may not now
Right.
based off of.
I heard that, I know our neighbor to the west had
Correct.
that
Waukee
exact
was one of them.
conversation, that they were going to look at a reduction, and they've now not doing that.
Tabling that, yep.
And just to put, I think what's also very important in that discussion, especially with legislators, and that's why this is very valuable, and why I refer to it a lot, is when you look at the projections out 7 years, and you look at our revenues and our expenses, and this is just general expenditure roll-ups, regular wage and salary costs every year, other expenses, we're going to be trending on average 2.5% on the revenue side, and that's baking in about a 3% valuation growth, which is, at some point, I know it sounds conservative for us, but with what's going to happen with the rollback, particularly next year, so not talking this budget year, I'm talking 24, 25, because of the valuation uptick in Polk County and what we're going to see statewide, that rollback number is going to drop like a rock next year. That's the way the formula works, especially if they're taking multifamily out of it. That number could be in the 40s next year. Now, it all depends on how it bakes out with what's our overall taxable
That'll be
valuation
offset
growth.
by the increase in assessed value.
But that's what they're doing, yeah. So because of the increase in assessed value, the rollback goes
Right.
back to reset it so it can't go higher than 3% when you're comparing the classes next to each other. That's a circuit breaker, essentially. That's what the rollback is a circuit breaker between the two property tax classes. I can barely explain it to you, and I've been studying it for 20 years. But so we're likely to have, so when you hear all the talk about, values in Polk County, assessed values in Polk County going up 20%, that does not mean the taxable values are going up 20% because of that circuit breaker. I don't know what it's going to be exactly, but we're putting in this budget 3% to be conservative of revenue growth for the next 7 years. So when you combine all other revenues together, we're proposing you're averaging probably a little bit below that 3%, when expenses are probably almost a percentage point higher than that. So at some point, and that's why you see in the future years, we're at least showing use of cash reserves, because there's that gap at some point. And then the question will be, as we track this every year, is how are we tracking where I showed about a 0.5 percentage point difference between the revenue average over the last 5 years versus the expenditure average being about 0.5% higher? There's a gap there. And if that gap widens, then you are going to get to a point where you're using your cash reserves up, where then a decision has to be made. But again, to Councilmember Judkin's point, there is, you know, a discussion of how you want to do that. Because my direction has been is hold it at 1014, because Matt, we know at some point we're going to have, that 1014 is only going to last for so long. But if that is a different conversation, I'm happy to adjust to what the council wants to see.
For me, it's a matter of presentation,
Yeah.
that we are accounting for these changes being imposed by the state.
By the state.
But for that, we would have been able to drop it. It was just that the slide that showed, here's what we get, because valuation, the growth has happened. I'm just.
Based on the
saying,
current
I
levy.
don't think we should ever be saying that.
Like that.
like
Okay.
that.
I agree with you. That's a heck of a story though, right? I mean, for us to tell, because we've got to educate. And it's easier for the legislators to take the win on their side, right, and all that. But I agree with you, we got to tell that story somehow. I'd also be more comfortable, it's the DART discussion. I'd feel more comfortable of looking at what this raise of the 1014 needs to be over those years, not to dip into the cash reserves as heavy and use that money for programs that we're looking at using it, right?
Right.
For flood buyouts and that type of thing, because those are the real numbers. And I'd hate to go from 1014 and increase it dramatically all of a sudden because we got to react 5 years from now. Then to start looking in 3 years, 4 years, to start ticking that up to match where we project it need to go, rather than one big bump.
And I think it's a balance between the levies too, because if you recall last year, because of the position of the trust and agency levy, for example, we moved some levy authority from trust and agency to the general fund to help it out. I think that's still a conversation point in the future, depending on how, again, we're being conservative on how healthcare costs are trending, but that's the vast majority. Insurance generally has been going up. On the general liability, cyber insurance, that side has been going up a lot higher, but we've been now starting to manage and mitigate our cost increases on the health insurance side. If that trend continues, there still might be an opportunity for moving that levy authority around, where it might still be 1014 overall, but at what point then do you start to look at those other items as well? And those are all things that, yeah, we've got. What I'm saying to you tonight is you have time for everything that we're talking about. And I would also say, at least there's some rumors on the House side, again, I'll definitely believe this when I see it, is whether or not the state backfills one time some of this loss in revenue from the drop in the changing the rollback. Again, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, but there has been some chatter about that. The Senate was not interested in that. I think the Senate Democrats during the discussion offered an amendment to do that. It failed on party line vote, but then the ultimate Senate File 181 passed 49-0 in the Senate.
Could you remind us, a penny is equal to what, 10?
17,000.
17,000.
Because our taxable valuation is 1.7 billion.
Okay.
Yeah, 17,000.
That's pretty easy to see.
17,700.
But the drop
29
might
and
have been.
17,000 would be. Eric can do the math on that for us.
Here's where the levy rate rankings are to some of the discussion a little bit earlier. When we look at last, so this is our proposed rate, 1014. This does not include any proposed rates that councils may be considering at this time. I can tell you from last year, Altoona and Ankeny were unchanged. Urbandale dropped a dime from 10.11 to 10.01. West Des Moines was unchanged. Johnston went up 5 cents. Pleasant Hill was unchanged. Grimes dropped from 11.41 to 11.19. Waukee dropped from 13.30 to 13.10. Windsor Heights dropped from 14.47 to 13.77. And Norwalk dropped 15.14 to 15.11. Again, $2 to $3 higher than our rate today, but there was definitely drops on the higher end of this scale. And then Urbandale below us dropping another 10 cents.
That drop due to lost revenue then, Matt, or?
I don't know how they did that. I know they're using their lost revenue in a lot of ways. And that's to Councilmember Judkins' point about the revenue side for us too, legislatively, is again, as I talked about earlier with lost, the Dallas County property tax relief. So the 50% of that, which is about $700,000 in this proposed budget, is being transferred into the general fund to support those expenses. So if there is a substantial change in loss that affects that overall revenue to the city, that's another revenue hit to the general fund.
And a future hit as well, if the legislature is successful at overall shifting more revenue generation to use taxes and sales taxes and from property and income tax.
So I've already kind of outlined my recommendation to you. I feel this budget reflects that financial strategy that you've laid out, reflects your strategic priorities that you've laid out, making those investments that are needed for a growing community and in key areas that you've identified, looking at that realignment of public safety services, particularly fire and EMS, and how we have the overlaps. So there obviously a savings on that side of things. Also keeping pace with inflation, as I mentioned earlier. The general fund in this proposed budget is making a substantial increased contribution to our capital equipment plan budget because of those growing costs in vehicles, and then some of the other bigger costs that we talked about earlier in public safety that weren't anticipated a few years ago. Those are things that we're trying to adjust for, and at the same point, having one of the lowest tax rates in the metro area and having those high quality services that you all expect. Cost to the taxpayer. Hold on. Let's see if I can fix that. Nope, I just slid it to the side. So this is as the budget is proposed today. So as you can see, there is the change. When you look at the residential at the bottom in terms of the increase, that increase that you see on the residential is strictly reflective of the rollback going up, at least as we sit today, a little over 2 percentage points, because that exposes more of a house's valuation to taxation. Now, if Senate File 181 passes, it changes that. And here is the change, which again is likely. So then you see the drop in the residential number because the rollback's going up just a little bit, about 0.3 percentage points versus the over 2%. So in numbers, it was about, before Senate File 181, it equated about $9.13 monthly increase. Again, this is all the utility changes that we proposed, as well as maintaining the levy where it's at. And $15.65 per month increase for commercial. Now with Senate File 181, that roughly $9 per month increase to residential gets halved to $4.19, about a 1.7% increase. And that's again all utilities, everything, and the commercial stays the same. Just to give you kind of an accurate comparison of the changes. The other thing we started doing here last year, the year before, is when we take everything together. Now granted, with this does not include any changes in rates, both utilities or tax rate for any of the other communities. This is just showing our rate increases on the utility side, where we rank. So we could change, Clive could get, on the commercial side, we could maybe nudge down in front, above Johnston, maybe, depending on what rate increases they're looking at on the utility side or the tax rate side. And as you can see on the residential side, we're in the top 3. But pretty close, about 60, 70, $73 away from where West Des Moines is at. And that's with them not not having, it's their current rates as they're sitting at today, not their proposed rates for any utilities. Last slide. So here's where I ask for your direction, how you feel about what we have included in this budget. Of course, in the memo, I laid out all of the policy directions, again, just recapping back to everything we talked about in workshop number 1 related to the utility rates. And then this next step table is pending. I would advise we stick with the February 23rd on the maximum property tax rate. But those March dates may adjust depending on what happens with Senate File 181 or whatever the House companion bill is. So with that, Your Honor, welcome direction, questions, comments from the council, and then I'll end with we would recommend approval of setting the public hearing for the max levy.
Question number 1, is there general consensus on that, on the recommendation? Looks like.
There is for me. I have one comment about the, what do you call it? Not the surplus, the funds. that
Cash
were-
reserve?
Cash reserve, thank you. One thing that we haven't prioritized based on our last strategic planning discussion that I'll be interested in continuing to elevate is the potential to start to create a fund for some incentives for redevelopment. And that's something that we're starting to talk about with the Economic Vitality Committee. So it would really need to be part of next year's budgeting process since we didn't prioritize it for this year. But I think that's going to help us to be in a position to try to encourage some more redevelopment in areas where we'd like to see it, which will, over time, improve our tax base.
What kind of figures are
So-
you thinking or suggesting, Susan?
I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take to do it, but I think that is kind of a thought process we can have, that's probably some earmark to think about for future use of those dollars that can then benefit us long-term. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I feel comfortable for the reasons Matt stated, but that's another thing I see coming down the pike, that a lot of times when we start to do something on a pilot basis, we only want to put 10,000 a year toward it or something, and to me, that's not going to cut it. We're going to need to be in a position to have something that's a real carrot
Well,
to
that would
work with
be-
the developer.
I think that's a good idea, Susan, and that may be where, if we're at 36% cash reserves, we take 6% and use that as the seed money to start that.
Yes.
Kind of a one-time
Great
transfer,
idea.
like we did with the flood-prone property buyout program.
Yeah,
So something like that.
yeah, good point.
And I think you might have that question on some housing programs too,
Right.
that you and I talked about.
Right.
Okay.
Other thoughts or staff direction? How do you feel about the messaging that Susan mentioned, taking that 360, making it whatever it's 21 cents or whatever, and including that as part of the storytelling that's what
I
what it
agree.
equates
Yeah,
to
I think it's a great
add
idea.
on the specific levy rate?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
And I'm curious, do you want me to that point, do you want me to combine the rollback, the commercial backfill loss with that too?
I think that's part of the story.
I mean, you had a $50,000 loss that's already baked in for this next fiscal year that adds to that 300,000 if that comes to fruition, or when it comes to fruition. Yeah, we're happy to give you that number.
Pete's face is like.
Well, I mean, the same reason we went through 50 slides here of really dense content so that we could, as people who study this stuff, understand it. That's also the wall that stands between us and being able to communicate this well and concisely with an audience that doesn't put that much time into trying to understand that. And we run into this problem frequently when we're trying to explain the relationship between what the State House does and how it lands in Clive. The topics that are much more easy for a lay audience to understand have to do with some of those costs we talked about at our first budget meeting around diesel, around concrete, around trucks. Those, I think, are easier to lead with, to make also a very accurate case for why it's important for the city to protect its current revenues, knowing that these future costs are out there in front of us. I think it's both and, you have to communicate both, but I would recommend starting with that emphasis on the expenses.
That's why you're the storyteller.
That's
We
right.
get paid the big bucks.
But and/or showing them what it really means to them, right? It
Right.
could have, your bill could have been this, and your bill is this. Because if you talk about $300,000, I'm thinking, a layperson to a city budget, who cares? It's 300 grand.
It's a $21 million general fund.
Why does that matter, you know?
Right.
So you start talking to them about how it affects them directly. It could have lowered their taxes, it could have lowered that X dollars equals this, a car payment or what, that kind of thing, then I relate.
That's a good point, Councilman.
And that's real money to people, right? How it affects their pocketbook and their financial decisions.
That's partly why my favorite slide in this deck annually is one of the last ones that Matt puts together showing that annual cost to the Clive taxpayer. And be able to demonstrate that in a world right now where costs are radically increasing, when you're talking about things that cost you thousands every year, like your services collectively do for the city of Clive, to looking at an annual increase for a typical residence of $50. It's pretty stable. I even like it better when we talk about how that looks like over time, because it's been steady in Clive consistently now for multiple years in a row. Last year, the net was for the average household a decrease.
Mm-hmm. It was, because the rollback number went the other direction. That's one thing to remember about this residential rollback is last year, it went down. It was 55, 56, and that's why I put that appendix in your budget packet every year. You see how it bounces. It usually bounces down in a reassessment year, which is what's coming up next year and the big valuation bump in the county. And it goes up in a non-reassessment year, which is the budget that we're talking about. So you're basically getting the value. Now, state doing their calculation with multifamily and the rollback number, you ask my personal opinion on it. If you're gonna treat multifamily residential like residential property, it should be in the calculation. I know that wasn't their intent, but if you think about it from
Why wasn't it though? Because I agree with you.
right, and that's getting lost in this debate a little bit is, okay, right, and if in 2013, we wanted to get to a point to treat multifamily residential like all residential, then it should be included in the calculation. Why isn't it? But that's getting lost in this whole deal. So I'm not gonna bother to belabor it. But so it typically it pings up and down. Now, the trend's gonna be, if you look at the trend over time, it's going down over multi-years because of when that 2013 legislation, it used to have a 4% circuit breaker, and now it has a 3% circuit breaker, where how high the valuation difference between ag and residential could be. So naturally, that means that rollback number is gonna start to slowly trend down. Now, there has been some talk, maybe, that are they just gonna do away with the rollback and set the residential at a percentage? But then when you have a big reassessment year, like we're talking about next year, then we're gonna be back, the legislature is gonna be back at the table saying we can't have this. So it serves a function. It's a very complicated function, but it serves a function.
One of the key points we've heard from the legislature, and they're right on this, right? Kind of twofold. One, pay a lot of property taxes, you should demand that you get high value for it. And two, you should get predictability about what that cost to your family and your business is going to be on a year-to-year basis. Now, I think this table in particular tells a really positive story about predictability when it comes to Clive. We'd also need to keep pairing it with that high value. So as long as we're talking about these expenses, I always like to pair it with the way that residents say they value the services as well, all that resident survey data that we can put alongside it too. There'll be things that are outside of our control, but the things that are in the control of this council, the quality of the services, the predictability of what it costs to get those services, and then the promise to keep that discipline long-term, those three bullet points together are a really positive story when the rest of the communities in the state have got a more chaotic story going on.
But I think to Susan's point, I mean, it almost seems like we're saying, okay, we're gonna take the chaos that's coming out of the state legislature and we're gonna be the responsible adults and make it all work. But we're not really getting a chance to tell the story of this is how much work it took to get there, right? This is what it could have been if it was a different story at the state level, right? And so I think, I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting.
And it,
Welcome to local government.
it definitely
Unfortunately.
shows that we aren't on automatic pilot. We didn't just keep that levy rate and assume that this is what it generated, that we knew this is what we needed to pay for these things, including these impacts from what the state decided to do. And it doesn't have to be adversarial to what the legislature has done, but I'm mindful of a very special resident in Clive, Art Whitmack, who runs the Taxpayers Association of Central Iowa, and they have conversations about whether local governments are on automatic pilot or not, and he's paying attention. And I like to be able to demonstrate to him and others like him who really are that we're paying attention to.
So we're good?
Any other comments, questions, suggestions? One final point to make before I ask for a resolution is that the position we're in, as Matt pointed out, is based on prior council decisions over the years and the work of the city staff to bring the budget in and our final expenditures below 100% to create those reserves. Otherwise,
Yeah,
we've been a world of hurt.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Your Honor, because, you know, the folks behind me and our department heads and our staff, you know, I've always felt our budgeting's a little different here than every governmental entity where, and I can't remember, I think Ted, you and I had this conversation in the military where, well, if they've got the budget, they're gonna go ahead and spend it no matter what.
If we don't spend it, we're gonna lose it.
And that is not how we operate here. You've got folks behind me where if it's budgeted, but it isn't, you know, we don't need all that amount, we're under the budget, great. I'm not racing to go spend that extra $2,000 that I saved on that piece of equipment because I've got this other idea. No, we don't do that. That was budgeted for, was planned for. And then our funds reap the savings of that, and that allows us to be in this advantageous financial position to weather these storms as they come, whether they're actual storms as an emergency reserve to be able to deal with those, or political legislative storms that come at us from the state legislature or the federal government for that matter, because we also have mandates that come down from the feds as well that we have to deal with. So to that point, I think that's a credit to these folks and how we manage this whole system. That's complicated. Different pots of money can only go for certain things, and they do a good job of managing it.
Eric?
Move the resolution setting the public hearing for 2/23/23 at 6 PM for the proposed city maximum property tax dollars.
Second.
A motion and a second for 2/23/23, despite what we're not going to go back in time. Yeah. Motion and a second, further discussion. Seeing none, will the council please vote? And will the clerk please post the vote? And we've set the budget hearing for February 23rd by a vote of, just say yes. Okay. 5-0. Thank you very much. All right, we'll move into reports. Pete, what have you got?
Busy week at the state capitol. The piece of legislation I've worked hardest on this week has related to stormwater and another attempt to preempt cities' abilities to manage stormwater. It's been really productive, though. This hasn't been adversarial. It actually has been a collaborative process with the new senator from Bettendorf that introduced the legislation, who's a former statewide president of the Home Builders Association. His name is Senator Scott Webster. Very productive. So I've been working with my colleagues in ISWEP, but then also with my colleagues in the Managers Association for the state of Iowa to talk about some work that could be done to bring together a set of stakeholders over multiple months to see if there's some consensus building that would prevent the need for some overarching state action at this point that could create a lot of unintended consequences as well. So more to come on that front. More immediate for the council, letters inviting folks to the Little Walnut Creek Sewer Project neighborhood meeting will be in mailboxes. If they're not there tonight, they'll be there tomorrow and on Saturday. That's going to be a big meeting. The mailing list for Clive alone went to 1,000 households. We're not expecting that kind of turnout. There are a lot of people in that group who don't live right next to the creek. My phone calls to people who live right next to the creek in Clive will be starting hopefully tomorrow afternoon, but if not tomorrow afternoon, I'll be catching people starting on Monday and offering to meet with them individually to answer their questions before the neighborhood meeting. The biggest thing to be aware of as you get phone calls from constituents is the first painful thing they're going to feel are trees going down. That will commence very early in March and extend likely through the entire month because they've got to go the entire corridor from east of 156th and Urbandale all the way to Warrior Lane at our border with Waukee. Information's up on our website. We reference that in the letter, and the letter will be sent out in your Matt's Friday email.
Anything else, Pete? Shrikant.
Real quick, DART had its financial budget second meeting. They're still working on something that, the commission was interested in hearing about what happens if the diversification funds that they're talking about doesn't happen and what's the backup plan. That still wasn't presented at this last meeting. So we were told it's still being worked on. So we'll have to wait and see on that. One thing that was discussed in a little more detail is that kind of, moving some of the funds around and kind of changing the cash reserve levels. We could, kind of like a little bit different scenario, but kind of like what we were talking about. It allows DART to weather the storm just a little bit longer. But at some point, there's going to have to be a discussion if this kind of put all our eggs in that basket of diversification doesn't happen, what do the service cuts look like, right? Not if, it's what do they look like? And so there was also some discussion around, does it happen in a stepwise fashion as, to kind of plan out, like, look, this is what we project the loss is going to be, so let's start stepping down these services when the time is right? Or do we go to more of a reactive position of, okay, we're out of money, we got to cut, we got to cut multiple things all at once. There's still some disagreement about what the right approach is. Me personally, I think the projection and the stepwise makes more sense and is more responsible, but we'll continue to advocate that position as long as everybody's in agreement.
And has the interim started? Is Sherry there yet?
So what was her first day? It was just recently, like yesterday or Monday.
Would have been
maybe?
Monday.
Monday. So yeah, her first meeting will be next week. Well, the meeting that she's running will be next week.
I think to add to the DART discussion is we had the city manager group for the budget together last Friday, and to emphasize the Senate File 181, that impacts DART as well. And this proposed budget, as part of the formula shift, has the tax levy in Clive and all the other communities except for West Des Moines and Des Moines going down. I asked the question, okay, what are you going to do if Senate File 181 passes? And they said, well, it'll still go down, it just won't go down as much. So they're essentially proposing to just change it on the revenue side in terms of the tax levy decrease to the suburban communities as a part of that formula shift.
Anything else?
Nothing tonight.
Eric?
A couple quick things. Attended the Great Des Moines Partnership Council here, attended the Governor's Inauguration Ball, also the Catch Des Moines Board meeting. A lot of great things going to be happening here in 2023 in the Des Moines Metro region. I'm not going to go through every single event, but a very robust year. Had great attendance last year at all the events right here. And we'd like to play the newest video from Catch Des Moines for you.
We watch sports to see the unexpected. We play sports to feel something. Here in Greater Des Moines, we're the unexpected sports mecca that feels like home. But our reputation wasn't given to us, it was earned. We are the rising stars, the grinders, we are the big ballers, the little kickers, the underdogs, and the bulldogs. From the backyards and backfields to the back rooms and backstage, we put in the work, and we're starting to reap the rewards. We've got events wacky and wild. Big and small, we host them all. Big and small. And that old sports cliche, nobody believes in us? Nah, you come here, you'll believe it. Because in Des Moines, only the essence are sight. Let's go! Only the essence are sight. Let's go!
Any follow-up to that, Eric?
Thanks, Pete.
You're gonna tell them about the body double, like,
Let's go.
hey, Duncan?
I just would like to report that I'm really seeing improvement traffic speeds on 142nd. So thanks, everybody. That's really paid off, really. I don't know if we're tracking that on the police side or anything, but it definitely seems to be an improvement. I think you'd be interested that Linda Westergaard from Des Moines City Council and I are relaunching the Metro Area Women in Government group. And the first session is going to be at the airport, so we'll all get to hear about what's happening with that project. And kind of for Matt's benefit, the next session with the communities that have invested in the airport is looking to be held in a virtual meeting in early March. Don't have the date set for sure, but it's going to be an update about progress with the airport in the context of taking advantage of the state's new CM at risk.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of how that has worked and how the project is moving. So that was my idea. I thought that would be something that the communities would enjoy hearing about, but you'll have a chance to understand what's happening with the airport as a result. So hope you'll like it.
And I know I happened to see the IMMI agenda for late, they're actually doing it in late March. So this is Iowa Municipal Managers Institute, and they're actually doing a session on that too.
Good.
I don't know who they're having. I'm assuming they're having like an owner's rep or somebody do the presentation, but they're
Okay.
talking about the CMR as well, which is good.
And I'll look forward to seeing most of you at Bravo.
Yep.
I have nothing.
Legal, no.
Just two things, just a reminder, I know a number of you have gotten back to me already, but DC trip, whether you plan to attend, chamber dinner, RSVP, and then the strategic planning dates. I know a few of you have gotten back to me. I know we've got some dates out in August. I'll be in my weekly email, August 15th, 17th, 26th, I think, but take a look at those. Get back to me, and so we'll get those locked in on everybody's calendars, but basically calendar-related items. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Do we have a Bravo table number?
No. I do not have any of that information yet.
And you've collected all the money you need from the people here?
No, I have not. Not yet.
Okay, just
Cool.
thought I'd
Just
give you the opportunity to mention
Just
that.
a reminder.
You just publicly shame those that have.
I'm not going.
Funny thing is the mayor said that when he brought his in right before the meeting, so he's allowed to say that. Gotta be truthful.
Okay, okay.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Are any of you hearing about issues with the Clive post office. I noticed that article was in the paper.
Read the article.
Everybody read the article. We've gotten the comments for years. I mean, it hasn't
been
gotten any
miserable
better.
for
It cycles up and down, yeah.
Well, I didn't know if, there's not much we can do, but just be
You know,
aware of it.
It did get some traction when I was at the congressional office. I do think it's worthy of the city notifying the congressional office because it did get pushed and we did have direct meetings with postmasters and I think things changed over down there during that time. And so a little bit of nudge, perhaps from the mayor in a letter or a meeting with the legislator. You know, the new one is eager to meet. I mean, I got a phone call from my day job the other day wanting to meet and eager to meet. And so it works, it helps.
Is there a sense we ought to give it a shot?
Agreed. Absolutely.
Wrapped up a letter from you.
Yeah, we've got a couple different things that we'd like to talk with our new congressman about.
Yep.
A couple
Okay.
grants that would be ready to
Okay.
get a letter of support to.
Good, good. Finally, potholes, and Pete, I don't know if you can update us on that. The roads are pretty bad.
Real bad. Tough cycle for us right now. Crews are out every day working on not just things that get reported, but things that they identify too. We featured potholes again in our newsletter for February, which if you haven't seen the electronic version, you should be getting it at home here today or tomorrow. And we'll keep pushing it all the way through March. If the council is interested, I can start sort of calculating, our calculation again, rough calculation on how many that we've actually filled. The pothole map is being populated again, but I would expect to see a lot more color and dots on it when we get into later February and March.
Just even driving down 114th coming in off Hickman, it's not good.
I'll flag that one for our staff tomorrow.
Yeah. And that is, that stretch of 114th, that's part of the reason it's on the reconstruction list is, I actually just followed our guys down 114th yesterday doing pothole repair.
Pete West Enos is your contact.
Yep, thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order? Do we have any correspondence? Then we'll adjourn at 9:13.